The Public Order Emergency Commission is now in session. La Commission sur l'état d'urgence est maintenant ouverte.
Good morning, bonjour. Just a couple of comments before we get started. The rest of this week, the witnesses being called are in a little different situation in the sense that most, if not all, do not have a witness statement that's been filed. And in some cases, Commission counsel may not even have interviewed them to any extent. So the estimates of time are therefore a little less certain than they normally are. So I just want to raise if people, some of the parties have put time in, if you like, as a stakeholder in case something came up, you might want to advise Commission counsel at the end of the evidence that there is no need. And those who see something come up that makes it such that they feel they need more time can maybe be given more time. So I'm going to be a little more flexible than normal in the circumstances because we don't really know what's going to come out and to what degree it will affect one or other party more than what was expected. So I'm just setting that out. The times are challenging this week. They will be big weeks, big days rather. So I will still be somewhat strict about timelines, but flexible if there is movement available, given that some people, I suspect, and I don't mean to suggest anything nefarious, but people may have taken positions on timing they won't need. So that's just as a preliminary, and that would apply, I think, for the witnesses for the balance of the week. So with that brief introduction, have we got a witness planned?
Yes, the next witness is Chris Barber.
Okay. Good morning. And if I could ask, I realize there's a fair amount of interest by some parties and maybe some emotional investment in some of the testimony, but I would ask that we keep it the way it normally is in a courtroom and in an inquiry, so that we can keep it going. Also, we don't have much time. So, with that, go ahead.
Mr. Barber, sorry, Your Honor. Mr. Barber, will you swear on a religious document or do you wish to affirm?
Swear on the Bible, please. Thank you.
For the record, please state your full name and spell it out.
Christopher John Barber, B-A-R-B-E-R.
Do you swear that the evidence to be given by you to this commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Barber.
Morning.
My name is John Mather. I am Commission Counsel. Before I begin my questions, I believe your counsel wants to make a statement.
Good morning, sir. For the record, Brendan Miller, Counsel for Freedom Corp. As I believe you already know, we've made invocations under All Evidence Act provisions, both federally and provincially, as well as Section 13 of the Charter. That's been done in writing. I'm wondering if I have to do that each and every time the witness testifies, or if the Commission has accepted the written invocation I've already provided, sir.
I think we can deem that the witness has objected to answers each and every question, and that on the grounds of the answers may tend to incriminate him or may tend to establish liability in a civil proceeding. So I think that's taken as a given and has been filed in the
Thank you very much, sir. That's all. That's my statement.
Okay.
So good morning again, Mr. Barber. Just so you're aware of the process today, I'm going to ask you questions for approximately the next 90 minutes. When I'm complete, the parties who have requested time will have time to ask you some questions themselves, again, for, depending on how things go, roughly 90 minutes, and we will have a final opportunity to ask you some follow-up questions if that proves necessary, okay? I want to start with some basic information about yourself. So I understand that you're from Swift Current, Saskatchewan, is that correct?
I am correct.
How long have you lived in Swift Current?
My life, 47 years.
And I also understand that you operate a trucking business called CB Trucking Limited. Do I have that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And can you just briefly describe the nature of that business?
Long haul, short haul, we haul agriculture equipment across the prairies and into the United States.
And what's your role with the business?
I'm the business owner and a driver.
And how many other drivers do you have?
I employ my son and a couple other lease operators, contract employees.
How long have you been in the trucking business?
Since I was 18, so just 28 years roughly.
And were you operating CB Trucking in January 2022?
I was, yes.
As the commission understands it, Mr. Barber, you were one of the original organizers of the Freedom Convoy that arrived in Ottawa in January 2022. I take it you agree with that?
Correct.
And you just have to make sure you speak audibly when you give your answers,
Correct.
just for the transcript. Thank you. How did you get involved in the convoy?
I was contacted by Bridget Belton, another social media follower, via the app TikTok. Communications started from there. Speaking about possibly slow rolls to protest the mandates for the border crossing coming into effect January 15th for cross-border travel for commercial vehicles.
Do you recall when Ms. Belton first contacted you?
I believe it was the beginning of January sometime. Dates might be fuzzy. January 8th, January 7th, somewhere in there.
And did you know Ms. Belton
I
before?
did not, no.
Okay. What did you come to know about Ms. Belton?
She's just another trucker, cross-border driver that was facing her job to be lost on the 15th of January unless she complied with the mandates.
And what did Ms. Belton, what was she asking you to do?
Get involved, to start something to try and speak out against the government going too far in some of these mandates.
And when you say government going too far in some of these mandates, can you explain at that point in time what mandates were concerning you?
The cross-border travel specifically.
And are you talking about the decision of the federal government to no longer exempt truckers from the requirement that they be vaccinated, otherwise they would have to quarantine?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that Ms. Belton communicated with you on TikTok. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Perhaps for the benefit of the commission and maybe people who aren't as familiar with social media, can you explain what TikTok is?
TikTok is an app, a social media app, short videos under 3 minutes. My daughter got me into it about 3-4 years ago, approximately. I surpassed her in followers right away, so that made her quite anxious.
And prior to getting involved in TikTok, were you using any other social media?
Yeah, I was on Facebook.
And you noted that you attracted a lot of followers in January 2022. Do you know how many followers you had on TikTok?
Prior to the convoy?
Yes.
I would have roughly guessed around 30,000 maybe.
30,000. And, by the time, in mid-February 2022, which we'll get to, but how did your followers grow at that point in time?
Quite significantly. Okay. We're up, I don't know the numbers, over 170,000, somewhere in there.
So again, prior to Ms. Belton contacting you, can you give us a sense of the sort of content you were posting on TikTok?
A lot of trucking videos, hauling videos, I'm generally a smart guy on social media, a lot of humor.
Were you posting at all about COVID-19
Yes.
and public health measures?
Yes.
How would you describe the nature of those posts?
Angry, very angry.
Why were you angry?
The mandates, the provincial mandates, the federal mandates, they just keep tossing more on. It seemed like it was just an overreach or they went too far on a regular basis, and it was very frustrating.
How did the COVID-19 public health mandates affect you personally?
We lost a lot of drivers. What freight I can't handle myself for my company, I share with other fellow drivers and other company owners. We lost, the government likes to say 10% of cross-border drivers. I didn't see that. I seen it more 35 to 40%. We lost a lot of drivers, like a tremendous amount of drivers, where freight was backed up both sides of the border and caused some significant trouble.
When you say you lost a lot of drivers, what about, and I understand when we're talking about public health restrictions, we're talking at various levels of government, but what about those restrictions led to you losing drivers?
The lack of the drivers getting the vaccination to be able to cross the border as of the 15th.
And when you say as of the 15th, do you mean as of the 15th of January 2022?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so what I understand you to be saying is that the government's decision to no longer exempt truckers from vaccination requirements, that was your concern projecting forward.
Correct.
Is that fair?
Yes.
Had you lost drivers prior to that in relation to COVID-19?
No.
Is there any other ways that again, doesn't matter the level of government for the purpose of the question, is there any other way that the public health restrictions relating to COVID-19 affected you personally?
Personally, when the COVID vaccine passport came in, made things a little tricky. We weren't allowed to enter restaurants anymore. I trucked throughout the whole pandemic. I never stopped. I was eating in my truck. I had a coffee maker in my truck. The restaurants were closed, gas stations were closed, bathrooms were closed. It was really tricky. I remember about 2 weeks into the pandemic thinking this isn't worth it and going home. And then the customer demands kept climbing, so I stayed.
Did you yourself get vaccinated?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Why did you make that decision?
I've spent the better part of 16 years running my company, keeping the big carriers away from my customer base, and I was at risk of losing all that hard work to not being able to cross the border anymore.
When you say big carriers, it's my understanding that you, CB Trucking Limited, is an independent trucking company. Is that correct?
It's a small company, yes.
Can you explain to the commission what it means to be an independent trucker as opposed to a big carrier?
Independent carriers, 3 trucks on my fleet. It's a lot harder to run a smaller company like that compared to the big companies. Most of my competition is up around the 50 to 200 trucks.
So you indicated in your earlier response that your TikTok following grew as you participated in the Freedom Convoy. In terms of discussing the Freedom Convoy and planning the Freedom Convoy, did you use any other social media other than TikTok?
I did Facebook, yes.
Any other social media?
Snapchat.
Anything else?
A little bit on Instagram, I'd say, but not much.
And the commission has seen in some of the documents relating to you that at times you would refer to yourself as an internet troll. Is that accurate?
Unfortunately, yes.
And can you explain to the commission what it means to be an internet troll?
A troublemaker, online troublemaker.
And can you maybe give an example of what that means when it comes to TikTok, for instance?
Well, on TikTok, I deal with trolls on a regular basis. They constantly attack me. Usually they're faceless. Some of them, you can see their profiles. I engage with them like I always have. I fight back and forth with them on a regular basis, and I've done that for many years.
When Ms. Belton reached out to you and began discussing the possibility of a convoy or a slow roll, I take it that was something you were interested in participating in?
Yes, sir.
And why was that?
To speak my part, to do my part, to protest, to try and get the government to start listening to us.
And picking up on that last part, at the outset, what were you hoping to achieve by participating in the convoy?
I primarily wanted the government to listen to our concerns.
Anything else?
No, sir.
Were you politically active before COVID-19?
I was not.
Were you an active member of any political party?
No, sir.
One final question about TikTok. We've seen information that suggested that in January 2022, you had multiple TikTok accounts.
Yes, sir.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Why did you have more than one TikTok account?
The internet troll that I would like to be would constantly become banned for posting inappropriate things or things that went against community standards. So your punishment for that would be 7 days, 3 to 7 days off the device, so you would log into another account.
So when you were suspended, you would then open another account so you could continue posting?
Yes, sir.
Did you find it hard to gain the followers you had when you started with a new account?
No. I've always ran a couple different accounts. Right now, I think I post on 3 different accounts.
So Ms. Belton contacts you, and you said you recall was perhaps early in January 2022, and begins asking you about slow rolls and potentially a convoy. What happened next?
Discussion started. We will then move forward with planning. Other people, other members, other teams became involved really fast. We realized that there was a lot of support behind us. The more we got into the logistics of it all.
Who were involved in the early discussions?
Early discussions, Bridget Belton and I, a male called Dave Steenberg. And with that, Bridget introduced me to people like James Bowder with Canada Unity, Patrick King, online social media guy.
And we'll have some questions about them in a moment.
Sure.
But I think what would be beneficial to the commission is to understand how, to the extent you can explain it, how you go from Ms. Belton contacting you, raising this idea, and then getting to the point where you're organizing what becomes a large event. Can you explain sort of how that progressed?
It was completely organic. Everything just literally fell right into place. I believe it was about 2 weeks from the time we started talking about it to the time we actually left. It was extremely fast.
Who was organized in planning the convoy?
All of us. There wasn't one necessarily a leader. It was a group of organizers per se. We had people in every province that stepped up. We had helpers in every province. It was everyone just came together.
Was there people who were more involved in planning than others?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And who was that?
Well, myself, Tamara Leach, Bridget Belton, James Bowder, and Patrick King.
And in those 2 weeks, how was the convoy promoted?
Via social media for the most part.
Can you provide some more information?
Yep. Tamara Leach and I were in contact, I believe, the middle of January, specific date maybe around the 13th, maybe the 10th. Tamara started a Facebook page and a Twitter account for Freedom Convoy 2022. And the word started to spread from there. We kept up on our TikTok videos. We all did Facebook Lives. We all promoted it via our independent social media apps.
And we understand that Ms. Leach started the Facebook page, as you indicated, in
Yes,
or
sir.
around January 13th. Prior to that, what promotion had been done about the convoy?
Very little, very little.
Had any promotion been done?
Just little things on social media and just getting the word out and finding out who was willing to help and who was coming to the plate.
It's the Commission's understanding that you participated in a Facebook Live event on January 13th, 2022. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Correct, yes.
And in that Facebook Live event, in attendance were yourself, James Bowder, who you've referenced, Ms. Belton, who we've spoken about, and Pat King. Does that accord with your recollection?
Yes, sir.
And there was other individuals there who were assisting in planning. Is that fair?
I believe so, yes.
And I understand that video took place prior to Ms. Leach's involvement. Is that correct?
I believe Ms. Leach was involved at that point. I believe that she was busy that night and could not attend that, if my memory serves me right.
And have you reviewed that video prior to your testimony?
I have, yes.
Okay. And it's approximately an hour and a half long, and subject to any comments from the parties, what I suggest to do is just read out the document ID and have it entered without showing the video itself, because I would run out of time if that happened. So it is COM 50829. And the commission has also asked a transcriptionist to prepare a transcription of that video, which I may ask you about later. But again, I'm just going to read out the document ID right now, which is COM 50838. So, Mr. Barber, I can take you to portions of the transcript if it will assist, but in reviewing the video, it strikes the commission that at that point in time, both Mr. Bowder and Mr. King were already actively involved in planning routes and promoting the convoy to the people that they were already connected with. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
And do you know how Mr. Bowder and Mr. King were promoting the convoy?
Can I add? I can add that Canada Unity became involved, and Canada Unity was actually planning. I learned later they were planning some sort of a route across Canada to Ottawa for a protest. They had the stops and everything already planned. They had a website ready. They had everything was all in place, to my recollection.
So yes, the commission's understanding is that Mr. Bowder had a website through Canada Unity, and on that website there was already route maps and
Yes.
stops and locations. Is that your understanding?
Yes, correct.
And Mr. Bowder is expected to testify, and we can ask him more questions about that. So I just want to clarify what you said there. Is it your recollection that that planning was already in place by the time you were connected with Mr. Bowder?
I believe so, yes.
And do you know how Mr. Bowder got connected to you and Ms. Belton?
I believe through Bridget Belton.
In the video from January 13th, 2022, which I've already referenced, Mr. Bowder presented a document that he referred to as a Memorandum of Understanding. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Were you aware of the Memorandum of Understanding before January 13th, 2022?
No.
Sorry, and just for the sake of the transcription, just if you could wait till I'm finished my question before I answer, just cleaner transcript. So were you aware of that memorandum?
No, I was not.
Okay. What do you recall Mr. Bowder saying about the Memorandum of Understanding?
I reviewed the video just a couple days ago, and I remember it again. I believe he just explained how the document worked and that it had already been sent to the Governor General and to the government, I believe.
Do you recall if at that time, and when I say at that time, I mean January 13th, if you had an understanding then what Mr. Bowder was hoping to do with his Memorandum of Understanding?
I believe I ignored it. I don't know. I wasn't into that sort of thing.
And again, we expect to hear from Mr. Bowder, and we'll hear his evidence on it. The commission understands that one of the things that the Memorandum of Understanding presented was a notion that in respect of the COVID-19 mandates, that Mr. Bowder believed that there was not enough time for lawsuits to challenge those mandates, and that in fact through a piece of law called the Helsinki Act, that a group of a citizens committee could come to an agreement with the Senate, and any mandates they viewed as unlawful would stop. Is that your understanding of ultimately what the Memorandum of Understanding meant?
Not to my knowledge. To this day, I still have yet to read the Memorandum of Understanding. I have no clue what's in the document, and I will never read it.
In January 2022, did you have any understanding of what Mr. Bowder's goals were with the convoy that he had organized?
No, I did not. Like I said before, it was a matter of a whole bunch of different groups coming together at the perfect timing and having an input into the planning of it, and everyone had their piece. And we were so unorganized for the most part. We used whatever we could, whatever means, whatever tools we could find.
In the early planning stage, what was Bridget Belton doing?
Same as myself. She was posting TikTok videos and promoting through her Facebook.
And Mr. King, who was on the January 13th live stream, what was he doing?
I believe the same thing. Patrick had a quite large following on social media, especially Facebook. So he promoted and did videos on his platform.
And prior to January 2022, did you know who Pat King was?
I did not know.
And how were you first introduced to him?
Via the Zoom call on the 13th, I believe.
And maybe I'll ask this at this point. Prior to the January 13th Facebook live stream, had you participated in any calls or meetings with Mr. Bowder or Mr. King?
I don't believe so. There might have been one in there earlier. I don't recall one personally.
Do you recall how you were introduced to Mr. King?
I don't, sorry.
When you first came to understand that Mr. King was promoting the convoy, what did you come to learn about him?
Just another helping hand, another person with a large following that would help.
Did you come to learn anything about his background prior to January 2022?
Not until probably 2 days into the convoy itself.
When you were meeting Mr. King and Mr. Bowder and Ms. Belton, did you ask any of them about their backgrounds and why they were participating in the convoy?
I believe so, yes. I understand Patrick King had children that were unvaccinated. I believe in Bridget was the fact that she was going to lose her job on the 15th of January.
At that point in time, did you have any questions yourself about who am I organizing with, and who are these people who are going to assist me in this?
I think I was just so excited and so overwhelmed right from the day one. I don't think I really had time. It was a very busy time.
The commission understands that many people stated goal in terms of the convoy was to end COVID-19 mandates. Is that fair?
Correct.
Were you aware of anyone who participated in the early organization who had a different goal than that?
No, sir.
As the convoy began traveling to Ottawa and then after it arrived in Ottawa, do you believe there were people who participated who wanted something more than to end COVID-19 mandates?
Yes.
And can you describe the basis of that belief?
There was different organizations that came and went. For the most part, we stayed as a close group, Tamara and I and myself and Bridget. The core group of actual truckers stayed together. Organizations kind of came in, tried to set camp up, and we either found a way to keep it under control or keep in the. It was a power struggle a lot of the time.
Can you provide some more details about that power struggle? What organizations, what they were trying to do, and what you did in response?
Well, we had a little bit of conflict between Canada Unity. That was one. Not necessarily conflict, but taking back our freedoms was involved there. No conflict, but the war vets joined us. They were beside us the entire time. We had retired police officers, OPP.
So Canada Unity, that's Mr. Bowder's organization, is that right?
Correct.
Can you explain to me what the conflict was with Canada Unity?
Power and control, simple.
What was Canada Unity doing that you didn't agree with?
I didn't like the MOU, I believe, even though I still have yet to read it.
So at some point, I take it you came to understand what Canada Unity was trying to achieve with the MOU, is that fair?
I still believe that they were after the same things we were. I believe it maybe was more mask mandates, more COVID restrictions in general.
So you indicated that the conflict with Canada Unity was about the MOU, and I'm just trying to understand what about the MOU gave rise to conflict.
Improperly written MOU, according to the people I've spoke to about it. It wasn't something on our agenda. It wasn't something we were pushing for. It had nothing to do with the reason why we actually came to Ottawa.
Who did you speak to about the MOU?
Miss Leach.
Okay, and what did she tell you about the MOU?
We had the same opinion.
But what did she tell you about what was in the MOU?
I can't speak for what Tamara said. I'm not sure if she's read it or not. She wasn't a fan.
Did you have any concerns that the MOU advocated or provided for an undemocratic change of power in Canada?
I heard rumors about it being that way. I heard rumors on both sides that it could be interpreted that way, and then it couldn't be interpreted that way. It was kind of a mixed.
Did you take any steps to figure out what exactly Mr. Bowder was trying to achieve with the MOU?
Not necessarily. I remember calling on Mr. Bowder and having him renounce the MOU partial the way through the convoy.
Do you recall roughly when that occurred?
I do not.
And what led you to ultimately make a phone call to Mr. Bowder and ask him to renounce it?
I believe it was Tamara that made the call. Just too much, there was too much highlight in it. There was too much spotlight in this document that we didn't have anything to do with.
And when you say too much highlight and too much spotlight, are you talking about, I think you'd characterize as the rumors that it called for something undemocratic?
Correct.
What happened after, to your understanding, Ms. Leach called Mr. Bowder and asked him to rescind it?
I believe it was rescind. I believe they removed it.
Did you continue working with Mr. Bowder throughout the convoy?
James was around, not necessarily worked with him. He was around. We've seen each other from time to time.
Another group you mentioned in terms of there being, and maybe this isn't your words, but I understand a power struggle, is that fair, among groups?
Yeah.
Yeah. Another group you mentioned was taking back our freedoms.
Yes.
Who was taking back our freedoms?
I don't know names. I know Roy and James were the ones that came out. They tried to help us out, create structure inside the meetings and the day-to-day planning.
Do you know what taking back our freedoms goals were with respect to the convoy?
To this day, I do not. I believe mandate freedom. Government gone too far.
And I think you described there was a level of friction with them. Is that fair?
From times, yeah, there was, yes.
And did you take any steps when you had this group that there was some friction or conflict with? Did you take any steps to figure out what their goals or what they were trying to do?
I believe so, yes.
And what did you do?
I wasn't personally part of those. I found my role outside walking the streets a lot. So the inner meetings, I tended to skip out on quite a bit.
And we've spoken already a little bit about Ms. Leach, who, as I understand it, your recollection is that she was likely involved around the time of the January 13th live stream. She just did not participate. Did I have that correctly?
I believe so.
How did Ms. Leach become involved in the Freedom Convoy?
Ms. Leach called me on my cell phone, I believe, like I said, somewhere before the 10th of January, and told me she had a little bit of experience in the Department of Protesting and Convoy. She was part of the 2019 United We Roll tour. We needed help, and I acknowledged that. It was just a phone call out of the blue. Tamara got my phone number and the friendship and continued.
Did you ever find out how Ms. Leach got your phone number?
She said the name before. I don't remember what the name was. She's a friend of a friend had my contact.
And you mentioned that Ms. Leach had participated in the 2019 United We Roll convoy.
Correct.
When Ms. Leach phoned you, did you know what that was?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and could you explain to the commission what the 2019 United We Roll convoy was?
Oil and gas. I believe they came from Alberta to Ottawa, protesting pipeline shutdowns or pipeline building, one of the two.
And Ms. Leach, it was your understanding, was involved in that convoy?
She was involved with some of the...
And did you understand that Mr. King was also involved in that convoy?
Yes, afterwards.
What about Mr. Bowder?
I don't know about James.
When Ms. Leach called you, had you heard of Tamara Leach before?
No, I had not.
And what did you come to know about Ms. Leach?
She's a mother. She's a grandmother. She's a regular Albertan, good-hearted, strong person.
Did you become aware in your early conversations with Ms. Leach that she had been participated in the Wexit movement in Alberta and been involved in the Maverick Party?
I believe I was told about that en route to Ottawa.
And is it Ms. Leach who told you that, or did someone else tell you?
Yes, it was Ms. Leach, yes.
Did you have any concerns that in participating in the convoys, Ms. Leach would be pursuing goals other than mass mandates and maybe pursuing political goals of either the Wexit movement or the Maverick Party?
That was not no, I didn't feel that at all.
Is that something you discussed with Ms. Leach?
I don't know if I've discussed it, but it wasn't really an issue. We never discussed anything in detail. It was noted that she was part of that in the past. I believe she wasn't. I don't think she was, or she is now, but she was, and it was never an issue after that.
We expect that there may be evidence that, whether it be Ms. Leach or other people who became involved in the Convoy organization, that there was an attempt to use the Convoy as an opportunity to pursue political goals that weren't just about ending the COVID-19 mandates, including political goals that may exist within the Maverick Party or within the Wexit movement. Is that a concern that you have now, looking back?
No, it was never brought to my attention that they were a player in the situation, and that wasn't the reason why we came to Ottawa. I would have fought that.
And why would you have thought that?
That wasn't the reason why we came to Ottawa. We came to Ottawa for border mandates.
Now I'm going to ask you some questions about the process of having trucks begin in British Columbia and drive across Canada and then arrive in Ottawa. First question, do you have a sense of how many trucks participated in the convoy that you had organized with Mr. Bowder, Mr. King, Ms. Belton, and Ms. Leach?
The tricky part was trying to get a solid number. There would be a certain amount of trucks, cars, buses, campers that would come into the convoy for a short period of time, let's say from Regina to Winnipeg, just to take part in it, and would exit off. And at that same time, more people would come in from Winnipeg to go to Kenora. I know for a fact some people left with their children in a semi from Saskatchewan planning on going to Regina and went home 3 weeks later. It ranged anywhere from 500 to 2,500 vehicles is what I was told. Looking in the mirrors, it was incredible to see the lights behind you and the long lines and watching the videos. It was approximately 25 kilometers long at some times.
Did you ever expect that level of participation?
No, not in my wildest dreams.
What was your reaction when you saw the level of participation?
Well, there was a lot of tears.
Can you expand on that?
Emotions. We were the things that we seen out the windshield of the truck as we crossed the prairies and into Ontario. Overwhelming support. People standing on the side of the highways. People lining overpasses. We were often late by around 2 hours. We were never really on schedule, and people stood in frigid temperatures, minus 20 to minus 30, just to get a chance to see us come through.
Could you explain to the Commission how the Convoy organization was able to coordinate that movement of trucks to come to Ottawa? How did people know where they were supposed to be, where the convoy was, what was going to happen to them when they joined the convoy?
We had code of ethics. We had rules to follow. We had speeds to endure. We had constant communication on either VHF FM radios or CB radios. Cell phone interaction with other people too. Constant communication. Safety was number one priority. When you're leading that many vehicles, the error was what could have been at any minute. So we managed to successfully make it from the west to Ottawa without a single issue, to my knowledge.
During that travel, who was primarily responsible for all of that coordination you're talking about?
I was at the lead of the pack. We had 2 escort pilot trucks leading us. Patrick King was in his motorhome halfway back, looking after the back pack. It was constant communication on the radio, constantly upping our speeds, lowering our speeds, trying to keep the convoy at a steady pace together. If I was going too fast, people would start to lag and there would be a distance. We would have to then slow down and catch everybody up.
Was there any point on the journey to Ottawa where you were concerned that the convoy, might not make it or something may interfere in the trucks arriving?
No, everything was well orchestrated. We had police communication right from, my role began from Swift Current to Medicine Hat, Alberta, where I picked up Miss Leach and joined the West Convoy. And that was where my part started. We were in communication with the first police force would have been Medicine Hat. We were in contact with Swift Current, Regina, Moose Jaw, all the way across the country for police escorts. If there was a traffic light, we actually called for traffic control at those intersections, so we could proceed through the intersection safely.
Right, and it's the commission's understanding, based on some of the documents that your counsel has produced, that people were in contact with the police on a daily basis.
Yes, sir.
Is that accurate?
Yes,
And were you one of those people?
I was, yes.
Again, based on the documents the commission's received, we also understand that when the convoy arrived in Ontario, that an OPP escort was there to meet the convoy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could you just provide some more explanation about that?
I don't know his last name. His name is Marty. He met us at the Westhock scale, which is a scale that borders Ontario and Manitoba. He met us there. He jumped out in front and led us. I believe Marty led us, I believe, to Thunder Bay-ish area, where then he got us into Kenora. He led us downtown Kenora to the rec center parking lot where we staged for the evening. We had a funny story, not a funny story, but coming into Headingley, Manitoba, the Hutterite communities from around the Winnipeg area came into Headingley with food trailers. They had hot food, burgers, everything you could think of. RCMP had called me and said the amount of people in the Headingley area was too great. It was a huge risk to safety to get in and out of the parking lot for the truck stop. So we had to abandon the plan to stop. So we carried on around Winnipeg, and 3 Hutterite vehicles with trailers followed us to Kenora and fed us in the parking lot at the rec center that night. It was cold as can be, and they had the barbecues out and the slow cookers. It was quite amazing.
So when you get into Ontario, I assume that daily contact with the police continued?
Yes.
And did that include daily contact with both the OPP and the OPS, or can you just explain what police services you were?
Contact was made with, I believe her name was Isabel from OPS. Isabel was in constant contact with, I believe, Chris Guerra, with Adopted Trucker, and things were planned on our arrival.
And were you in contact with Isabel or anyone from the Ottawa Police Service?
I spoke with Isabel a few times on the phone. I've met her once on the ground here. I didn't have a lot of logistics with Isabel. That was already being looked after.
And did you speak with Isabel prior to the convoy's arrival in Ottawa?
I believe I did. I made contact with Isabel, but I'm not sure exactly when. There was a phone call made to say, "I'm Chris, here's my contact."
When you were speaking with either the OPP or the OPS, and I'm talking about you personally, what were you telling them about the convoy's plans when they arrived in Ottawa?
Exactly what it was. We were there to protest border mandates, and our main priority was safety and working with law enforcement, whatever it took.
Do you recall having any discussions with any police officers about how long the protest might last?
I think the discussion started after the first weekend with OPS, I believe, and we had a couple OPP officers in constant contact too. I know his name was Andrew.
So prior to that point you referenced, so after the first weekend, did you discuss the potential length of the protest with any police officials?
I believe not.
At what point did you realize that the protest may continue for an extended period of time?
I don't know if I ever really thought much into it. Everything moved so fast when we arrived.
Prior to arriving in Ottawa, had you personally turned your mind to how long you would stay?
Well, my business would suffer a little longer I was away from it. So that in the back of my mind, I really didn't know. It was a movement of its own, and it continued to grow, and you mentally had to try and keep up with it, I guess.
In your discussions with either the OPP or the OPS as the convoy was approaching Ottawa, did any of the police services give you direction on where you could park the trucks once you arrived in Ottawa?
Interesting story. All the way to Ottawa, my understanding via people in the Convoy Canada Unity was that we had 2 major staging areas. One was Major Hill Park, and the other one was Confederate Park, I believe Confederate. And that was, to my understanding, that's where we were allowed to park and protest peacefully.
Is that where you ultimately parked?
That was not, no.
And I understand that you parked your truck on Wellington Street, is that fair?
We had a police escort down Sir John A. Macdonald off the 417. My understanding, I didn't know this till afterwards, police blocked the convoy after myself and another tractor trailer went through. They shut the convoy down around the War Museum on Sir John A. Macdonald. They then led myself and Tamara and the pilot trucks. We made it to roughly the Supreme Court on Wellington, and that was as far as we could go. There was a ton of vehicles that had come in the night before, apparently, wanting to be there for the arrival. So there had already been tractor trailers lined up in front of Parliament down to approximately the Supreme Court.
Did that surprise you to see that there was already large commercial vehicles?
Yes.
And why did that surprise you?
I was unaware of it. My understanding was we were going to come in, police were going to escort us right to the two parks. We would park safely out of the way and it would be fine.
Did anyone from any police service ever explain to you what had changed?
I believe not, no. I don't know if I ever asked that question.
Did anyone else ever explain to you what had led to the vehicles being parked in the downtown core as opposed to in the parks you identified?
Apparently, we caught them off guard. We overwhelmed them right off the bat with the trucks coming in the night before that we were unaware of. Our main convoy, as far as I know, had nothing to do with those prior arrivals. So,
have you since learned who was the early arrivals?
They're all semi-operators. I knew a couple from my home province. They were in the area. Apparently, they weren't part of the convoy, but they were in the area and they took part in the protest.
So I asked you this, and I think you have confirmed it, but you parked your vehicle on Wellington Street. Is that correct?
Yes.
After you parked there, at any point in time up until, we'll say, February 14th, were you given any indication by any police services that you shouldn't be parked on Wellington and you'd need to move?
I was not, no.
Did that come as a surprise to you?
I don't know if I really had time to think if it was the surprise. It was so fast-paced.
The commission has heard evidence from several police witnesses who have been asked questions essentially about whether more could have been done to limit or control the size and scope of the protest in Ottawa in the early days. I've heard your answers, but I'm just going to ask you one more time. Was the police response to the convoy what you were expecting or anticipating when you arrived?
I guess a hard question to answer. I believe they did the best they could. The scope of the amount of vehicles that came in, I don't know how things went so wrong when we first arrived. They did what they could. They did the best they could. We were all 90% of the trucks were stuck out on Sir John A. Macdonald, I believe, with pretty much abandoned. Nobody knew where to go. Nobody had direction.
In retrospect, do you think it would have been better had the trucks parked where they were initially designated to park?
Oh, absolutely.
And why is that?
Well, if it was staging areas we were allowed to take, Major Hills Park and Confederate Park, I understand now that was never part of the deal, apparently, although I don't know. That was all I was told.
And why would have that been better?
We would have been off the main streets. Occupying or parking all over the city was never part of why we came.
So I've just been handed a note to suggest that both you and I are speaking a little quickly for the interpreter, so I will try to slow down, and I'll ask you to also try to slow down. No, that's okay. We're both to blame, so it's okay. So I'm now going to ask you, and we've already touched on it a little bit, but about what happened with the people who were originally involved in organizing the convoy. We've spoken about Mr. Bowder already, but I'm going to now ask you about Pat King. And as I understand it, that in or around January 22nd, 24th, in or around that time period, you and Ms. Leach began having discussions about concerns relating to Mr. King. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Can you please explain to me the nature of those discussions and what the concerns were?
I believe the first episode was a CBC article. Came out of some past prior social media posts that Pat had been a part of, and we met with Pat, discussed our concerns. I believe we smoothed the waters over and we carried on at that point.
So do you recall what concerns, what had been reported in that CBC article that caused you concern?
I don't really, I never read the article. There was something about something Pat said years ago. According to Pat, the article was edited, or what he said was edited. I can't confirm or deny that.
So I'm going to pull up a document. It's HRF 401221, and we'll go to page 2. And while this document comes up, Mr. Barber, this is a document that has been provided by the Convoy Organizers Group. It's a timeline of events that has been provided. So this was provided to us by your counsel. And if we could go to January 24th at the bottom of page 2. And would it be possible, yeah, thank you, Mr. Clerk. So you can read the entry that says concerns re Pat King. Do you see that?
Yes.
So this here says Tamara and Chris discussed concerns about Pat King after viewing a tweet with a video making reference to bullets. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is this conversation being described here the same conversation we were just talking about?
I believe so, yes.
Does this refresh your memory at all about what the concerns were?
Yes.
Okay, can you please explain?
The article was made to sound like bullets would be flying. Apparently, according to Mr. King, when we confronted on him, he'd stated that the article was taken out of context, edited to make him sound like he was planning violence, where I believe what he was trying to convey in that article was different than what was portrayed by the media.
And the commission has seen reports that at some point in time, Mr. King made a comment along the lines of this is going to end in bullets. Do you know if that's what was being discussed?
That was, according to what I was told, that was a previous post 2 years prior, something to do with an Indigenous standoff.
And during this conversation, were you also aware that the media was reporting on a video that in which Mr. King had made a suggestion that at some point Justin Trudeau may catch a bullet one day? Were you aware of that?
I recall something about that, yes.
Do you remember if that was something you knew about during this discussion, or after this discussion, did you learn more about what Mr. King had posted?
I believe it might have been after.
So it says in here in the second sentence, Chris agreed perhaps Pat should be sent home, but there was concern about the trucks Pat brought with him. Do you see that?
Yes.
What was the concern about the trucks?
Possibly division inside the convoy. Pat brought a certain following with. I don't remember the extent of anything after that. We discussed sending him home, and obviously he didn't.
Was the concern that if Mr. King was sent home or asked to not participate, that his supporters would also stop participating?
That would have been a good guess, yes.
So if we can continue on, the next sentence talks about it says, talked to Pat about the tweet on the roadside. Do you see that?
Yes.
Was that the conversation you had already described to us?
Yes.
Okay. And were you a part of that conversation?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And then it says, following this, a captain's meeting was held in Kenora, and at the end of the day, where everyone expressed concern about Pat King's involvement.
Slow down thing.
Yes, thank you. That's right. the decision was made that someone would talk to Pat within the coming days and request that he not attend in Ottawa. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a question about these two sentences, but before I do that, can you just explain what a captain's meeting is?
We had road captains involved in approximately 2 road captains per province to organize the trucks. Those were the people that the people from that province could go to with concerns or issues. So we had a number of road captains within the convoy.
And it sounds in here like after your initial conversation with Mr. King that concerns continued to be raised by other members of the organization. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know if someone ultimately spoke with Mr. King and asked him not to attend in Ottawa?
Possibly. I wasn't involved in that conversation.
At any point, did you hear from Ms. Leach or anyone else about whether that conversation had occurred?
Not to my recollection, I don't.
And Mr. King continued on to Ottawa?
Yes, he did.
Were you aware of any resolution having been reached between the people who had concerns and Mr. King?
I believe whatever happened, it worked itself out to the point where Pat stayed with the convoy.
Were you personally concerned about what Mr. King had said previously on social media?
I don't believe it was a concern. He explained to me that it was taken out of context and edited to make him sound worse than it was. I took him for his word on it.
So you accepted the explanation at the time?
Yes.
Do you today still believe that, do you still accept that explanation?
I believe Pat had all the right reasons and a good heart.
So I'm going to pull up another document. This is COM 50902. And while we're waiting for the document to come up, Mr. Barber, this is a news article, and we can go to page 3 of the document. This is a news article, and it reports on text messages between yourself and Ms. Leach. And as I understand it, and we will get to this later, when you were arrested, the police seized your phone and you no longer have access to the messages on your phone. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I also understand that we expect to hear from Ms. Leach that she also no longer has access to her text messages. You don't need to comment on that. We can ask Ms. Leach about it. But I'm showing you this news article, and as we go through, if there's anything in the article that you think is not accurate, and I appreciate you don't have your phone with you anymore, you can let me know, okay? So if we go down, it says, on January 22nd, Leach told Barber they needed to have a very frank discussion with King, raising concerns about past allegations with him. Despite these concerns, Leach also said he was needed by the movement in an apparent contrast to later statements in which the convoy tried to distance itself from King. We need him, and I don't care about his past, but it only takes one, she said. We have to control his rhetoric, not even threatening to throw snowballs at the Parliament. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall if this is something that Ms. Leach text messaged you?
My phone was very busy. I'm assuming it's here, so it had to be.
No reason to
No.
say this was not a message she sent you.
Right.
When Ms. Leach said the movement needed Mr. King, do you know what she meant by that?
I can't. I'm not sure.
Do you agree that the movement needed Mr. King?
The best thing about the movement was it was inclusive to everyone, regardless of any beliefs, I guess. Everyone had a place, everybody had a spot. It was just managing how.
So I take it from your answers, and I just want to make sure I'm fair here, is that you, from what you had learned about what Mr. King had maybe said in the past, the content of those statements didn't concern you because of the explanation Mr. King provided. Is that fair?
I guess. Pat and I had a power struggle between each other. That was pretty evident right from day one. It was just, it was a power struggle back and forth over control. It wasn't anything that couldn't have been managed.
Did you have any concerns, separate and apart from your own views about what Mr. King may or may not said, did you have any concern about the public image of having Mr. King associated with the Freedom Convoy movement?
I guess there would have been some concerns at times, I guess. The bad media posts and releases on a regular basis definitely caused some concern.
And can you just explain what you mean by, did you say the
media?
Yeah, and what was concerning you about the media's coverage?
They attacked him on a regular basis, I believe.
Did you think those attacks were fair?
I didn't know. Like I said, I didn't know Pat previous to the convoy. I met him on the 13th for the first time, and things were so busy after that, it was hard to keep your head around all the different moving parts.
Other than being busy, is there any reason you didn't do more to look into the people who were associated with your convoy?
My primary goal was to get those trucks to Ottawa safely. So phone conversations and that were hard to have. Everything that we did was logistics. It was myself on the mic, on the CB mic or the FM radio mic all day long, making sure the trucks were safe. I kind of left that up to other people in the organization.
You say, this media report says that you texted to Ms. Leach, I know he's had issues, I've got skeletons in the closet too. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you recall texting that to Ms. Leach?
Yes.
Okay. What were the skeletons in your closet?
Well, like I've said before, I've been an internet troll for many years.
At this point in time, was there anything in particular that concerned you about what you had done on the internet?
Nothing that was related to the convoy.
What about things that were unrelated to the convoy?
Yes.
What concerned you?
I used to post nasty, distasteful memes via share memes or just posting online in a negative way.
And it's the Commission's understanding that some members of the media identified certain Facebook posts that you had made and had reported on them or tweeted about them. Is that something you were aware of at the time?
Yep, they've been circulated for quite some time.
Okay. And these include Facebook posts that contained racist and anti-Muslim comments. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
Okay. And I expect you may be asked questions about those by some of the parties, and I wanted to give you an opportunity now, if you wanted it, to speak to some of the racist or anti-Muslim things you posted.
Well, I can honestly say that if anybody learned anything or grew more during the convoy, it was me. I was a different person 9 months ago, whatever it was, 10 months ago. Coming out here and seeing the amount of love and the people of all different colors, all different race, everything. It was such a diverse crowd of people here. There was. So there were so many tears, there were so many hugs, there was so much laughter, there was so much, it changed the person, it changed me.
How did you change?
It humbled me, I guess. It made me realize that a lot of those stuff that I used to post on the internet before was very distasteful, and there's a better way to do it.
One of the things that the media reported on during the convoy was that you had a Confederate flag in your shop in Swift Current. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And you posted at least one or two TikToks addressing that issue. Do you recall?
I did, yes.
And in one of those TikToks, you said that the Confederate flag was, you explained that I believe you'd purchased it in the United States. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
And then you described it as a piece of cloth and get over yourself.
Yes.
Is that a sentiment you continue to have?
I believe there's two different contexts to look at the Confederate flag. I've got a good friend that lives outside of Atlanta, Georgia. She's an African-American lady. I had an in-depth conversation with her many times on this occasion. She's explained it to me quite well. She said the way the two different contexts is how you look at the flag was the area of the General Lee and the Dukes of Hazzard via like Kid Rock, Leonard Skinner music. When we grew up in our hometown, we called it a rebel flag or a Dixie flag. We didn't really call it a Confederate flag. It was on license plates. It was on back windows. It was everywhere. And at that time, it was more accepted, apparently. So in my travels in the Deep South years ago, I'd come across a flag store. I seen the Dixie flag there. I purchased it. I hung it up on the wall of my shop, not thinking anything of it. My African-American lady friend in Georgia explained to me that if you wore that flag over your shoulders to a Confederate battlefield, I would probably call you a lot of names. But she said, being the way you're displaying it now, and the fact that you loved your childhood watching the Dukes of Hazzard and seeing that flag on the roof of the General Lee, it's a different context.
Do you still have the flag in your shop?
What I did with the flags in the shop was I zip tied them. So they were hanging on the wall of the shop. I went up on a ladder and I zip tied them together. They're still there, but they're not displayed in the correct manner. Out of respect for.
And when you talk about how you've changed, is that an example of something you're doing differently?
That would be, yes.
We've spoken about Mr. King a bit. Once you arrived in Ottawa, did you did you continue to work with Mr. Bowder in terms of the protest activity that was going on in Ottawa?
No, I hardly seen James the time I was here.
Okay. And we've spoken a bit about Miss Belton. Once you arrived in Ottawa, what was Miss Belton's role in the convoy?
Same as myself. She was more centralized around the hotel area where we had our daily meetings, making sure things were looked after. My job morphed into more of a outside walking the streets, making sure the trucks were well looked after, making sure the concerns were well, working with law enforcement on a day-to-day basis, making sure that we had emergency lanes open wherever the trucks were parked. We had a couple different hotspots, not hotspots, but places in the city that we'd lost. We couldn't get the emergency lanes open, and they weren't, looking back now, they weren't the trucks that came with us from the west. The one issue was Rideau and Sussex. We spent many days down trying to get an emergency lane open with law enforcement, OPP, and OPS.
And then we're going to have some questions about Rideau, Sussex in a moment. We expect that Ms. Belton may indicate that there's been a falling out between you and her. Is that true?
Yes.
And what's the nature of that falling out?
Just difference of opinions.
What are the different opinions?
I don't even, just difference of opinion, different direction. I just chose to stay on a path. My criminal charges have left me to be a lot more silent. I can't speak with like what I used to be able to speak about the convoy. I've had to remain silent. So I've, instead of fight with anybody there, I've said my piece and went my different ways.
If we could pull up a video, HRF 146. And again, I'll give you some context while it comes up. So this is one of your TikToks, Mr. Barber. And we're going to watch it in its entirety, and then I'll have some questions flowing from it.
Okay.
Hey guys, convoy related issues right now, and I just want to get this out there. This convoy to Ottawa next week on Sunday is a peaceful protest. Anybody that joins this protest or this convoy from either coast to coast is to adhere to the rules of the convoy, and I am dead serious. If anybody fucks with them, they are out. Emergency vehicles have the right of way. When the lights are flashing, we pull over and they are the utmost attention. Law enforcement is to be respected. Never, ever not respected. We are working with law enforcement across the country in big cities, and we have their approval 100% until we fuck that up. Convoy rules. There's a code of ethics we're going to have to follow. We want this done properly. Right now, the public is 100% on the truckers and this mandate, removal of mandates side. We do not want to lose that. When we start acting like assholes, we lose that. Let's keep our eyes on the prize and hit the federal government where it hurts. We want the mandates gone. Mandates need to be removed, and we're not leaving until they are. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. You can pull that down. So I have a few questions arising out of that video. One of the things you say early on is that you want a peaceful protest. And the commission has seen many instances, and we don't have the time to take you to them all, of where you insist on the protest being peaceful, and to the extent there's any sort of suggestion of violence, you immediately step in and say, this needs to be peaceful. Why was that important to you?
We had the public on our support. That was, and I'll apologize for the language there, Commissioner. That was another thing that I've worked on in the last number of months.
I've heard worse. Don't worry.
That's good. You can take the trucker out of the truck, but yeah. That was the utmost importance. The world was watching us. We had, there were so many people, and safety was utmost. And we were told by the lawyers flew out, I believe it was the end of the month, the first part of February, something like that. And we were told by the lawyers on a daily basis that we were a legitimate protest. We were allowed to be there. We were doing the right things. And the last thing I wanted to do was wreck that for the people that we were trying to represent. And there was a ton of support all across all over the world, really.
And to put that video into a bit of context, you say that this is a message for the convoy that's coming next week, or arriving. And so we understand that video was taken probably sometime in the week of January 23rd. Does that sound right?
I believe so, yes.
So that would have been before the lawyers had gotten involved and you were
Yes.
beginning to get direction from them. Is that correct?
Yes.
So at that point in time, when you're emphasizing the importance of a peaceful protest, did you have a concern that the people who were participating in the convoy might not be peaceful?
I'll give you a little example of truck drivers. They're like herding cats. You've got every different style of driver, and I've always said you put 200 truck drivers in a room and somebody's going to get a black eye and a broken nose. Knowing that going into it, I was worried about that because of the differences of opinion with all truck drivers. I can honestly say that was something that surprised me. There was none of that. The drivers were what I seen, they were extremely well behaved. They listened to the rules of the road. I didn't have a single incident to my recollection, that went bad.
So they listened to the rules of the road. I assume you mean on the way to Ottawa, is that fair?
Yes.
Once you got into Ottawa, was your observation that the protest was peaceful?
I believe it was loud, but it was peaceful.
Did you see any acts of violence?
I did not, no.
And we'll get to the noise in a moment.
Yep.
In another TikTok video you posted, and this would have been during the protests in Ottawa, you say that the last thing we need is a January 6th style insurrection, and that was one of your biggest concerns. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
Why was that one of your biggest concerns?
I believe the federal government was backed into a corner. And I personally believe that was the only way, I guess, out of it for them to demonize us to the point where they could say insurrection when that wasn't the case. And so I pushed that message constantly, daily. Peace, love, unity. Like I said, it changed me as a person listening to myself daily saying that.
When you were saying that, what sort of activity were you contemplating that might give rise, either correctly or incorrectly, to the impression that this was going to be some form of insurrection?
The police buildup. We had daily meetings with police, whether it be OPP or OPS, and everything was positive. But it seemed like the police presence built on a daily basis.
Was there anything that other protesters were doing that were concerning you? And I'm not just talking about protesters within your group. I'm talking about of all the people who were in Ottawa.
Not that I've seen, no. The trucks that I looked after on a day-to-day basis were excited. They were excited. We were 2 years outside of lockdowns. To live again, and we've seen that on a daily basis.
So another thing you mentioned in the video that we showed was that there was rules of the convoy. You talked about clearing the way for emergency vehicles and that law enforcement need to be respected. Was there any other rules of the convoy?
Basically, that was it. Yes, there was a code of, I don't remember if we actually did a code of conduct up or not, or we just, mornings we had tailgate safety meetings with the drivers to make sure that everything was well. There was constant communication with everything. I had no concerns with the trucks. The trucks were always well behaved, and like I said, law enforcement was always open and honest. We worked really well with every law enforcement that I ever spoke to.
But at the same time, you recognize that it was important to have rules and try as an organizer to at least try to have some sort of order over the people that were in Ottawa. Is that fair?
Yes.
As an organizer, did you believe that you had responsibility for the conduct of the protesters in Ottawa?
I took it upon myself to do everything in my power to make sure that the drivers were notified if things weren't right. I can't say it was my responsibility. I don't act on behalf of someone else, but I definitely did what I could to try and make sure things were done properly.
And what motivated you to do that?
Just the sheer size of it, and the support. We had support, like I said, all over the country, all over the world, and there were so many people watching. It was exciting to see the general public. And one of the biggest things for me was excited to see the young kids get back involved with trucks that were excited for the horn honk, the standing on the side of the highway. Kids wanted to be truck drivers again, and I haven't seen that since I was a child.
So from what I'm hearing, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, is that you liked what you were seeing, you felt it was positive, and you wanted to try to keep that atmosphere because you wanted to continue the positive experience. Is that a fair sort of summary, perhaps not the most articulate?
Correct.
When you were in Ottawa, what were your views on the police's responsibilities with respect to peaceful protest? They seem to respect. I dealt with quite a few on a daily basis, and I can't say I had a harsh conversation or anything with any of them. Maybe police were always respectful. I would walk up to random officers standing on the side of the street and or sitting in a police car patrolling a barricade and say, "Everything okay? Have you seen anything that was a concern?" And I never once got a reaction bad. In the video we showed, you mentioned that the public is on our side, and when we start acting like assholes, we lose that.
Absolutely.
Do you
correct.
recall that?
Yes.
What did it mean to you to be acting like an asshole?
Disrespectful. Not playing by the code of conduct or the rules.
Can you give me an example of something that you believed would be disrespectful?
Being disruptive, I guess. Like I said, we tried on a daily basis to make sure everybody was looked after. So the police had free lanes through all. Ambulances had free lanes. I know it was pretty tricky. We worked diligently on it. I lost about 20 pounds in the matter of 3 weeks with the amount of walking I did, working with law enforcement. I had a vehicle here, but it was hard to get around with a vehicle. So a lot of times it was walking, and it was frigid. It was 20 to 30 below. I had 2 t-shirts on, 2 hoodies on, and long underwear and 3 pairs of socks at times.
I won't ask you if you put the weight back on, so, because I wouldn't want anyone asking me that question. So, you say acting like an asshole included conduct that was disrespectful or disruptive. Did you see anything that was disrespectful or disruptive when you were in Ottawa?
Personally, I didn't know.
And when I say that, I appreciate that not everyone in Ottawa was necessarily someone who had come with your group or who might listen to you. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So with that in mind, at any point, did you see anything in Ottawa that, that might not be the person who came with you, but you wish they weren't doing it?
I never seen, like I said, anything that really concerned me, if somebody was there that wasn't part of the original group that I brought in, I would try really hard to negotiate with them or work with them to open that lane if they were parked in a spot that wasn't where it should have been. Sometimes it was successful, sometimes it wasn't. I really struggled a lot with, like I said before, when it comes to all truckers are different. That dynamic really played in certain parts of the city where.
What was your view on how the protest was portrayed in the media?
It was a negative light right from day one. Yeah.
What do you think was being missed?
Everything. I had numerous occasions where people came up to me and said they had to come down and see it for themselves because the media wasn't portraying it properly. And it was a different thing when they got here.
The commission has heard evidence and received written evidence from various residents and municipal officials, several complaints about the protesters' conduct. I expect you'll be familiar with them, but some of the things that the commission has heard is that there was excessive noise due to air horns. There was harassment and intimidating behavior, including people yelling racist or homophobic slurs, and that there was just a general disorder and unsafe conditions, including open fires, propane tanks near buildings and cars. Is this sort of evidence or concerns? Are you familiar with that?
I can honestly say I never encountered a single episode of that. Obviously, there was fires with people trying to stay warm. There was propane tanks for heating things, no different than I have a propane tank on my porch with a portable barbecue. So. As long as it was looked after safely, I guess.
In your mind, who was responsible for making sure that, taking with the propane tanks or other flammables, who was responsible for making sure the protest was safe? And not that anyone was going to do anything intentional with a propane tank, but something bad could happen and people could get hurt. Who was responsible for avoiding that outcome?
We left things up to the road captains. Like I said, there was usually 2 road captains per province, but that morphed into usually a couple road captains per block. And we would hold, not myself personally, I stayed out of most of those meetings, but the people would hold meetings every day to go over certain things and issues and safety concerns.
I now ask you about the horn honking. The commission has heard evidence, and I'm sure you're aware that at different times in the protest there was a lot of horn honking. I assume you'll agree with me about that.
Yes.
Did you consider the horn honking to be a form of peaceful protest?
I considered the horn honking to be a form of excitement more than peaceful protest. I'll be the first to admit the horns annoyed me. I did everything in my power to try and get the horns to stop. I've put out multiple videos on a regular basis saying stop, especially after the court order came in on, I believe, whatever day that was, the 7th.
So let's pause there for a moment. The horns bothered you, and prior to the court order, which was an injunction to stop the horn honking, what steps did you take to limit the horns prior to the court order?
Speaking to the drivers, it was getting everyone orientated, trying to get them situated in a place where they were safe and their needs could be met, I guess. Seeing as our entry was so messed up, I'll use the words, it was organized chaos, unorganized chaos. There was trucks everywhere, there was vehicles everywhere. The only thing I could do was put my videos out stating, we're not here to disrupt residents of Ottawa. They didn't ask for this. It was the federal government is why we came, and did what we could.
So I'm going to show you a video and then a post from your Facebook. So we'll start with the video. This is HRF 192. And again, this is one of your TikToks.
Okay.
They've already filed a $4 million civil lawsuit against us for horns. You guys shut up over there? Am I doing my part?
And then if we could pull up COM 50889.
Did you get an idea what kind of guy I am on social media by that?
While we pull up, would that be an example of you being a troll?
No, that's me being a funny guy.
All right, so now I'm showing you, if we could zoom out so we can see this. And, we understand this to be a Facebook post that you made on February 12th, 2022. To assist, I believe that is the character Buffalo Bill from the movie Silence of the Lambs.
It is.
And this is a joke about how that if the government doesn't get rid of the mandates, the horns are going to come back. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then I'm going to show you one other Facebook post that's COM 50888. And so in this one, this appears that you're sharing on February 13th a photo. I would guess this would be described as a meme of a boy blowing a bugle or a trumpet, being symbolized as the rest of Canada, and then the Ottawa plugging their ears. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And first, I'll ask you: are these two posts that you made on Facebook?
It's my name. Like I said, things were so busy. I'm assuming I shared that one. Obviously, I would have probably shared the first one too. It was scrolling Facebook and seen it and just hit the share button. That was probably more like, I found it humorous at the time, I guess.
So when you look at the video we showed in these two Facebook posts, could you see why someone would question your sincerity when you say that you did everything in your power to stop the horns?
Absolutely, yes.
And what would you, again, you have an opportunity to speak to that. Is there anything you'd like to say?
I can't take back what I posted. I guess it was the excitement of the day on social media, flipping through social media and seeing the post, and it's a click of a button to share it and put it out. Seeing it now, I'd say it's distasteful.
We can take that down. Briefly, I'm going to ask you some questions about efforts to move trucks onto Wellington Street, and I understand there was a few different attempts, and we're going to hear more evidence about it this week, but I have some questions for you. Agreement was reached with the mayor. You were involved in moving 4 large trucks up to Wellington Street, is that correct?
It was more than 4, yes.
Sorry, I said 40.
40, yes, okay,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. And prior to that, we understand that the Freedom Convoy group had made an effort to have the trucks on the Rideau and Sussex intersection moved onto Wellington Street. Do I have that correct?
We made an attempt, yes.
Okay, and can you tell me what happened with that attempt?
I was successful with one truck. There was, there was a load safe. It was a tractor trailer. He was parked right by the War Memorial. I remember the story on it. He was parked sideways across the complete intersection, and law enforcement had tried to get him to straighten his truck out for quite some time and failed at it miserably. I remember it was easy. I walked over to the truck. I stepped up on the running board and I said, "Hey buddy, you're in the way really bad and you're causing us some grief. Could you just back it up against the curb, please, and you'll save us all a lot of trouble?" And he literally put the truck in gear and backed it up against the OPP, and the OPS officers were amazed it was that easy.
Were you able to move the other trucks on Rideau Sussex?
Was not, no. Those were a different group there. It was harder to talk to them.
And what was your understanding at the time of who was in the Rideau and Sussex intersection?
I remember there being a language barrier. There was a lot of Quebecers in that corner, right in the Rideau Sussex corner. So that, yeah, I didn't have much interaction. I remember being there maybe twice to try and work something out to get some lanes open as per OPS and OPP asking. I was unsuccessful every time.
So I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. In your conversations with the OPS and OPP, you were trying to get a lane open for emergency vehicles, is that correct?
Correct.
And you made an effort with the people at Rideau Sussex, it was unsuccessful?
Yes.
And other than the language barrier, was there any other reasons that was unsuccessful to your mind?
They were there, and they just refused to move. So I did what I could. I worked with law enforcement. Maybe it was twice. Miss Leach and I were there with OPS one day, and I believe I was there by myself with OPS another separate time. So probably twice I was there.
And did you have, prior, at the time, were you familiar with the name the Farfadas?
I was not, no.
Do you know when the first time you heard the term Farfadas?
About a week ago, under a week ago.
In the context of this commission?
Yes. Apparently, according to
Well, we'll have a witness testifying later today who I'm sure can shed more light on the Farfadas.
more than me, yes.
I'm going to now ask you some questions about the other protests that occurred outside of Ottawa in January and February 2022. While you were in Ottawa, did you have any communications or interactions with anyone who was participating in protests in Windsor?
I don't believe I don't believe so. If there was messages on my phone, they would be per people with no contact information, just phone numbers. I received so many text messages from so many different people. I don't want to say that I didn't, because I may have. I never endorsed it. I never communicated openly with anybody from Windsor at all.
Do you recall whether anyone asked you or anyone that you were working with in Ottawa for assistance with respect to the protests in Windsor?
If anybody asked me, I declined. We were never associated. We had enough to deal with here. We weren't worried about.
Did you have any interactions or communications with anyone participating in any of the other protests anywhere else in Canada? And I can give you examples if it helps, but I'm going to ask you generally to start.
I got text messages from some friends at Coots. Never any, just saying how things were going. Never any advice or never asked any questions to my recollection. They had their own thing going on there, and it wasn't involved with us in the city here.
Who were your friends at Coots?
There's a couple guys that were down there, just some local drivers that I've been friends with for years.
Who were they?
One man, his name is Dan Somerville. He was off and on. He was never an active participant. He went down just to check it out and come back. There was another guy. I don't know his name. I'd have to look at my phone. I know what truck he drives. I know what he hauls.
Okay. And do you know this individual whose name you don't recall? Do you know if he was participating in the organization of the Coots protests or if he was a participant?
I think he was just a participant, yeah. I don't know the organizers at Coots or Windsor. So.
Did you have any communications with anyone who was protesting in Emerson or Surrey?
I would imagine text messages on my phone, but not people that I'm familiar with.
Did you ever interact with Jeremy McKenzie while you were in Ottawa?
I did not, no.
Did you know who Mr. McKenzie was during the protests?
I became aware of Mr. McKenzie during the protest. Just know that he was a veteran, and we did a lot of work with the veterans when we were here. Although I never seen Jeremy that I know of, I met a lot of people but I don't recall meeting him or seeing him, or I've never spoke with him too.
Were you familiar with the group Diagolon during the protests?
Yes.
What did you?
Well, not during the protest. Afterwards, my knowledge of Diagolon, it's a meme. It was something that Jeremy made up to troll, online troll.
Have you spoken with Mr. McKenzie since the protests?
I have not.
Coming near to the end of our time, so I just have a few more questions for you. It's our understanding that after the Emergencies Act was invoked, you were one of the people who had their bank accounts frozen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell the commission what that meant for you and what that was like?
Well, my bank accounts were frozen, I believe, on the day I was arrested on the February 17th. My corporate accounts, as well as my joint accounts, were frozen for the weekend, unfrozen, I believe, the Monday. My Toronto Dominion bank account was frozen for upwards of 3.5 months.
And how did that impact you?
I learned how to use cash again.
And you mentioned already that you were arrested on February 17th. Is
I
that
was,
correct?
yes.
Okay. How has the arrest affected your life?
I guess they kind of caught us off guard. They were really professional and really good to work with. I can't say a bad thing about anyone. I was walking with my son and 3 other of the road captains. So if you Google my name in the arrest, you'll see a photo of me grinning. My son was there. He was 18 years old at the time, and I looked over at him and seen him. That look he had as a 6-year-old or 7-year-old kid, where the tears were welling up. He was scared, and so I simply just said, "Hey, bud, you're good," and grinned like that. And they caught me on camera, of course, and everything's been good since. It's changed quite a bit.
What's changed?
Well, I've got criminal charges now, and I've never had criminal charges. I've never been in trouble with the law before.
And one final question for you. Is there anything that you think it's important for the commission to hear that we haven't touched on?
I think we've touched all the bases. The truth is here, I have nothing to hide. As far as I know, we were doing everything within the law, according to legal counsel. And that was my main primary goals.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have the cross-examinations to go ahead. The Government of Canada, I think, is up first.
This applies to all of us, I assume. The note about the translators, the reminder for the translators still here. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Andrew Gibbs, and I'm part of the council team for the Government of Canada.
Mr. Gibbs.
So we've heard a fair bit of testimony this morning about the start of the convoy and the general organization and the factions or divisions within the groups that preceded. Is that fair?
Correct.
So the spark, as I understand it, was you and Ms. Belton
Yes.
meeting over TikTok.
Yes.
And you eventually organized with others to come to Ottawa to drop the border mandates.
Yes.
And that was your sole objective.
That was my personal sole objective, yes.
So to be clear then, the others that eventually joined or started participating may have had other goals and objectives.
Quite possibly, yes.
And you're aware of some of those goals and objectives?
There was a lot going on, but yes, for the most part.
For example, Canada Unity was seeking to sign the MOU that Commission Council spoke to you about.
Yes.
And others were seeking to, I'll say overthrow, but replace the Government of Canada.
My understanding when it comes to the MOU, and I think that was the only thing that ever came up, was the fact that there was something in the MOU that said, and not necessarily overthrow, but hold the government accountable, apparently. And like I said before, I've never read the MOU. That was never anything that we came to Ottawa for. That was not even on the cards, and if anybody came to me stating that, I would have promptly told them to go home.
I think you had mentioned you attended a Facebook Live interview.
Yes.
And Pat King was hosting it.
Yes.
And I believe the MOU was presented during that.
Yes, correct.
And do you recall Pat King saying that the objective was to tell the government who's in control?
You could have, yes.
And to give them pink slips?
Possibly.
And a pink slip you would understand as removing them from their jobs, firing them essentially.
I can't speak for Mr. King, but possibly.
Okay. Now, as the groups started joining you, I think we saw one TikTok video where you mentioned that this is, and I believe your testimony as well today was that never expected this level of participation in your wildest dreams.
No.
So many people joined this protest.
Yes.
And in fact, it became a multi-purpose protest.
I guess so. I stayed with my original beliefs of the border mandates. That was the one that affected me the most. That was the reason why I got involved. All the other mandates in place that I had issues were provincial mandates, so really had no relevance here in Ottawa.
But some people in the group seem to think they did.
I guess so. Like I said, I can only speak for myself, and then my primary goal was border mandates.
Okay. And so during the Facebook Live, Mr. Bowder suggests that there will be a number of events that occur. And in fact, in addition to the Facebook Live, which was referenced at COM 50829, there's a separate video where you and the other organizers, Ms. Belton, Mr. Bowder, and Mr. King, are interviewed by Benita Peterson. Do you recall that interview?
I don't recall that.
Okay. It's in the record at COM 50838. And during that interview, and we can bring it up if you like, it again is a lengthy interview, over an hour and a half long, but it does speak to the activities or events that Mr. Bowder proposes to have. He also shares the MOU again and suggests that one of the events will be to present that MOU to the Government of Canada or representatives thereof. Okay. The last point that I would make, just with respect to that video, but I'll move on to the basic idea here, that there were, as you say, a number of factions or groups that were involved.
Yes, correct.
Okay, and you didn't have a vetting procedure to check who was going to be there?
We did not. This was a purely organic.
And so as the announcements and the invitations started to come, the convoy that was planned with Mr. Bowder's logistics started to catch fire.
Yes.
And you'd mentioned that all truckers are different,
Yes, very much so.
and it's a bit like herding cats.
Yes,
And if you put 200 in the room, somebody's going to get a black eye or a broken nose.
primarily yes.
How many did you bring to Ottawa?
Oh, many. Like I said, there would have been 2,500 vehicles in the west convoy. There was convoys from the east, convoys from the south. There was convoys. I don't know the numbers on how many people were here. There was a lot. On the weekends, it was very, very busy. It was very busy.
And is it fair to say that you couldn't control them all?
Absolutely, I could not control them all.
Is it also not correct that you had a large flag on the back of your truck?
It was a billboard sign, I believe.
And what did it say?
I don't remember. It's hanging on the wall in my shop right now, but it's something about mandates, I would imagine. I don't remember. If you could refresh my memory if you have it.
Well, I believe that perhaps you'll agree with me that there were many flags around town with the message F. Trudeau.
Yes. I didn't have on the back of the bunk of the truck, I have a decal there that says that. I did not have a flag on my tractor that had that on it.
Okay, so there was a decal on your truck with that slogan.
Yeah, a smaller decal up on the back of the bunk.
And would you agree that that became a bit of a rallying cry?
I was surprised to see how many it was. There was a lot all the way across the country, yes.
And were there other messages against the Liberals?
I think it was just that, as far as I remember.
Okay.
I seen a better rendition of it the other day. By the way, my thoughts have kind of changed on that a little bit. I seen a young kid a couple days ago that said hi to me, and he had a Truck Trudeau shirt on.
Same underlying message?
But probably a little more politically correct.
Right, but understood by
Yes.
the crowd as being the same message
I would assume.
and encouraging children to share that message.
It was a child that had it, so.
Okay. You had mentioned to Commission Council that you were frustrated with the mandates,
Correct.
and you were, I believe your testimony was that you were very angry.
Yes.
And did this protest and convoy and general sentiment that you and Ms. Belton started, did that inspire others?
Yes, it did, of course.
As part of your group, and this, when I say your group, I'm referring specifically to the Freedom Convoy 2022. I think it's you and Ms. Belton at one point and Ms. Leach.
Yes.
And Mr. Bolton, Bowder, sorry, by that point is outside of the group?
He was always Canada Unity. I don't believe he was ever part of Freedom Convoy
Okay.
20.
And Mr. King has been kind of pushed to the side a
He
bit?
was separate, yeah.
Yeah, okay. He still has a large following?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And I think we heard reference to a video about social media on TikTok where Mr. King was attributed as saying that Mr. Trudeau was going to catch a bullet. You recall that?
I heard about it, yes. I don't think I'm not sure if I ever seen it or not.
Okay, perhaps I can show it to you now. If we were to bring up, Mr. Clerk, OPS 407967. And I'd like to just play the first 20 seconds of it. It goes on.
Trudeau, someone's gonna make you catch a bullet one day. To the rest of this government, someone's gonna fucking do yous in. You sons of bitches.
The only way that, and I'm going to say it out loud, the only way that this is going to be solved is with bullets. And yeah, I said it. That's the only way something's going to happen. A massive revolution on
Thank you. Now, I believe you suggested that Mr. King had told you previously in a conversation that this was edited and taken out of context.
He did, yes.
And you will agree that it came to light during the protest.
Yes, I believe the second part of that video, my understanding with Pat was that that was from a previous post, something to do with Indigenous lockdowns or Indigenous protests somewhere else in the country where that bullet comment came from.
Right, but it was posted during the convoy.
It was, yes, I believe.
Okay. And you yourself admitted, I believe, to Commission Council that being a bit of an internet or troll.
Yes, sir.
And having previously posted nasty, racist, and anti-Muslim content.
Regretfully so, yes.
And you have a significant following now?
On the TikTok, I do, yes.
Yes. And Mr. King also has a significant following.
Mr. King, I believe, due to his conditions, isn't allowed on social media.
At the time?
At the time, I think he had a significant following on Facebook. I don't think he was on TikTok.
And we saw a discussion between you and Ms. Leach referred to by Commission Council, where you and Ms. Leach discussed the need to keep him around if possible because of his following.
Apparently, yes.
Okay. So you're aware that the Freedom Convoy group, this would be your group, put out daily briefings.
Yes.
And these daily briefings, did you have input into them?
Not very often, no. My job was literally out with the trucks on a regular basis. I would come sit in at the end of the day and have conversations with other people in the group to get, but I don't remember being, I remember being at the first news conference. I remember telling Ms. Leach that I didn't want to be the one in front of the camera, but I would be the one that stood beside the one at the camera, and that was the only time I was, I think I did a couple, but I was always sitting off to the side. My job was truck safety, truck issues, making sure everybody was looked after.
Looked after in terms of fuel and mechanics and food?
Yeah, fuel mechanics, if any issues arose, working with the police. That was my main job, was working with law enforcement.
Okay. And Would you agree that the daily updates, the purpose of those was to inform the participants in your group of the daily events?
I believe so, yes.
And it was circulated each day?
I believe so, yes.
And it would be circulated in the morning, presumably?
That I
With
can't
the weather
tell.
for the day?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we can turn to HRF 709, and this should be dated January 28th, if I'm not mistaken. Does this look like one of the updates that the Freedom Convoy 2022 group would have circulated?
It could have. I don't really remember reading any of them.
Okay. Well, we'll just walk through it briefly because there are a few of them that I'd like to bring to your attention. This one is dated January 28th. It provides that the Saturday weather is sunny, low of -21, etc. for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then it's giving the general update on the overview. You see the overview paragraph there will be the biggest protest movement in Canada ever. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And if you scroll to item 8, I just want to bring this to your attention because I believe you said earlier that the only purpose of this, your group, Freedom Convoy 2022, was to end the border mandate.
I noted that was my personal mandate. That was
Okay.
myself. I don't speak for everyone on the group. So I didn't have anything to do with these drafts on a daily basis. I was purely here for the mandates.
Okay, so is there somebody we should be speaking to with respect to these daily updates?
I'm not even sure who produced these on a daily basis. I can't speak to that. Like I said, I was out. I literally got out of bed at 7 o'clock in the morning every morning, if not earlier. Was out with the trucks
Slow down, please.
the entire day. I was on the ground the entire time. At the end of the day, if something urgent arose, I didn't take part in any of these updates.
So you'd agree that you were one of the faces of the Freedom Convoy 2022
Agreed, yes.
with the largest social media presence
That could be contested. I'm not sure. Yeah,
by others in the power struggle, presumably.
could have been, yes.
Okay. So item 8 states, of note, Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is on the Board of Trustees for the World Economic Forum. She is a key figure there, along with President Xi of China, Bill Gates, and other globalists. It was the Global Economic Forum that started. It is 2030. You will own nothing, that stated, sorry, it is 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Had you heard this message before?
I've seen it on social media before. I didn't, like I said, I never read this document, so I don't know what would be in it.
Okay. There are a series of these daily briefings, often making reference to the World Economic Forum. And there is one at HRF 5029 on February 8th. That refers to, at the top, can we pull that one up, please? Again, this is February 8th, and there's an image of the COVID-19, the Great Reset, is from the World Economic Forum. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland is on the Board of Trustees of the WEF. Again, had you heard of the Great Reset before?
Via social media posts, more so in the last 6 months. I don't recall seeing that or even hearing about it at the time.
And what is the nature of your understanding of this book, The Great Reset?
I have never read it.
Okay. If you'll scroll to the bottom of this, there's a reference, a section that deals with if you go to the next page, tow trucks refusing service. You see that section?
Yes.
According to Ottawa City Manager Steve Kanalakos, who testified earlier about the difficulty of obtaining tow trucks to the Commission, all tow truck companies under contract to the City of Ottawa are refusing to provide heavy tow truck services. This has been, this has been a common occurrence right across Canada as tow truck operators are considering their long-term relationships with the trucking industry as well as the Canadian public. Is that consistent with your understanding?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you. If we now turn to February 16th at HRF 6052, and this is the last, or second to last daily update I'll bring you to. This one begins with a photograph of Prime Minister Trudeau with World Economic Forum leader Klaus Schwab. Do you see that?
Yes.
And underneath there's a description of a video of Klaus Schwab describing Trudeau's loyalty to the World Economic Forum. A video has emerged, World Economic Forum leader Klaus Schwab describing Trudeau's loyalty to this globalist organization. The video appears to have been taken in 2016, just after Trudeau became the Prime Minister. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we scroll to the bottom, there's a Twitter link there with the number one waffler. If we scroll to the bottom, it ends with a photo of Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland.
Yes.
Do you see that photo?
I do, yes.
And the caption reads, Finance Minister Freeland, seen here at a World Economic Forum event, says the government can arbitrarily seize bank accounts, crowdfunding, money, and cryptocurrencies. Now, this is issued on February 16th, this newsletter, to your group, the faction of Freedom Convoy 2022, correct?
Yes.
Now, on February 17th, another post is issued, HRF 6083, which is a special notice issued by the group.
Just to note, you're out of time, but did you know if you'll be much longer?
I need about 5 minutes on these 2 points, sir, and they'll tie the two together.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
make it
If I
tight,
may have your
please.
indulgence. You have the post, and this is a Freedom Convoy 2022 reaffirms its commitment to peaceful demonstration, correct?
Yes.
And in this notice, you'll see that it expressly condemns, if we scroll down, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph, Pat King does not speak for us. We expressly condemn any talk of violence from him or others. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that accurately reflects your views at that time?
I had nothing to do with this document, so it would have been inside the meetings, I would assume.
But in terms of your views of Pat King,
Yes.
that's an accurate statement
That
from
is
your
an-
perspective?
Yes.
And also talk of violence from him or others?
Yes.
Were you aware, sir, that the night before, on February 16th, following the other notice with the photograph of Chrystia Freeland at the bottom, that Deputy Prime Minister Freeland received a death threat?
I was not, no.
So if we can turn to pb.can 401757_rel. And again, you had said earlier, your testimony here today is that you had no control over the people who had come to the protest in response to your open invitation.
Correct.
And so have you seen this email before?
I have not, no.
It's sent on Wednesday, February 16th at 1:23 p.m. to Chrystia Freeland, MP, and it reads, I declare war on all the Canadian government for lying about COVID-19. Chrystia Freeland will get a bullet to the head. Prepare to feel our wrath. Yours truly, the Canadian COVID government resistance. We will visit you at your home this Friday at 6 p.m., so you better be hidden and be placed into protection because we know where you live. And signed, Larry Jenkins. I assume you would reject this statement and any such action.
Unequivocally, yes.
Thank you. And the last question then is, were you aware, sir, that on February 16th, the same day, the OPP apprehended someone in Ottawa who was wearing body armor and carrying a large knife, along with other knives, a sword, and machetes that were seized out of his truck?
I was not aware of that, no.
Okay, I will take you to OPS 3011837.
Mr. Commissioner, I understand my friend's out of time, and this witness has testified several times. He has no knowledge of these things, so I'm wondering what the purpose of this is other than grandstanding.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is hugely helpful in the sense that he can't comment on any of these, but maybe you can just file it for the moment and try it on someone else when you have some time.
Thank you, sir. So the last question then is, would you agree with me that when you start a fire and fan the flames, it can get out of control, and you had no control over those other factions who had come to this protest?
That's where I spent a lot of time on the ground. I spent a lot of time working with people that were with the original convoy from the West, and with people that were not with the West. If somebody had a concern, I said it on more than one occasion on my videos. If anybody has a problem, if anybody wants to yell at somebody, find my number and phone me and yell at me. I will gladly take it. The last thing I ever wanted was a letter like that. I haven't heard that story up until now.
Understood. And I believe, sir, that you'd also confirmed that you were not always successful in your efforts to convince the participants to agree with you or to follow you.
Agreed, yes.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, so that takes us, I think, to the morning break. So we'll take a little time, and so we'll take 15 minutes and continue on the return.
The commission is in recess for 15 minutes. La commission est levée pour 15 minutes. The commission is reconvened. La commission reprend.
Okay, next, I understand it's the City of Ottawa wants to go next? Okay.
I think it's more a request from the coalition to go later, but I
Okay.
said we're happy to go anytime.
Okay, well, and let's start with the City of Ottawa.
Just checking if it's morning or afternoon. Good morning, Mr. Barber. Alyssa Tompkins, counsel for the City of Ottawa.
Please do.
I just have a few questions for you today. We saw earlier in this proceeding that you had texts with Kim Ayat, who is the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services at the city.
Yeah, I'm not sure of his role, but yes.
I'm just going to put them on the screen to assist you in that regard. So if we could bring up document OTT, I think it's 30057. And these are the text messages were produced by Mr. Ayat. So I believe Chris, protester, is you.
I'm assuming so, yes. It looks like, yeah.
Yeah, so if we could just scroll down to the third page. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about your role in moving the trucks and how far it got. So if we get to here, starting at this exchange, we're now February 15th, which I believe is the Tuesday at 8:30, and Kim is asking you how it's gone moving the trucks effectively, and in particular, how many big trucks you were able to move. So if we could keep scrolling, please. Just the large trucks and not the pickups or cars. And then I believe this is your response. If we keep scrolling. Yeah, can you confirm that you provided this information to Mr. Ayat, that it's accurate, and any elaboration that you see fit?
So to my recollection, we moved approximately 100 vehicles into the downtown core on that February 15th, 40 of which were tractors, semi-units, and apparently approximately 23 were moved up onto Wellington in one block.
Okay, now when you say 23, what happened to the rest of the 40?
They moved out of town. They would have went to exit. We called it exit 88 Armoire or Antrim.
Empire?
Antrim.
Yeah, Antrim truck
Antrim?
stop. Yeah.
Antrim, or there's two different ones, and I always got confused with which one it was. It was the one on the east side of town, anyway. So.
Okay, that was my next question was about the trucks leaving downtown. Now, after this, if we keep scrolling, it refers, I note, in passing, to you tiring yourself out. So again, your weight loss. Sorry, if you could scroll up, Mr. Clerk. Apologies. So then Kim writes to you about running into trouble with any trucks. And then if we can scroll down to your response. Thanks, keep scrolling. Yeah, so if you can just confirm that you wrote this to Mr. Ayad and then just provide a little more context for the commissioner.
Absolutely. So February 14th, we had a meeting at City Hall with Kim and Drummond and I believe Steve, if I'm not correct.
Steve Kanolakos?
I believe so, yes. We left that meeting excited, ready to go out. We did an agreement that we were going to move as many trucks as we could out of the residential area up onto Wellington. Myself and 3 other road captains who were close with me went out and started speaking with the drivers, trying to figure out who was ready to move. Who was ready to move first thing Monday morning, who we could count on, and where we could get them to move. So 7 o'clock in the morning rolled around Monday morning, February 15th, and we struggled with communication between police, city, and ourselves as to who allowed the move. So we were on at 7 a.m. It was roughly, I'm thinking about 12:30 after lunch before the first police car actually moved and we were allowed to move. So my understanding, we had 72 hours to get as many vehicles out of the downtown core as possible. Something broke down, it was out of my control. We got as many trucks as we could that day. And you remember it was cold. And at the end of the day, I was wore out. I was done. It was a lot of walking. It was a tremendous amount of walking. Something happened at the end of the day. There was a breakdown. I believe Chief slowly resigned. Something happened where the deal was off the table and we were done. So I did everything in our power. We had so many more places on Wellington. We could have put more trucks. We mapped everything out. We had guys that were ready to move. We ran at a time in the day on the Monday and then planned to continue moving on the Tuesday. And like I said, something fell apart. We were done.
Okay, when you say something fell apart, you have no further evidence on that for the commissioner?
My communication was with Nicole with OPS, and she'd explained to me that we'd had our chance. I don't remember how. My text messages are at the police station. That we had our chance, and we didn't accomplish what we agreed to do, and the deal was off the table.
Okay.
That was different from what my understanding of what the day was. Where things fell apart, I still yet to understand.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Barber.
Okay, the next, I believe, is the Ottawa Police Service.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. This is Jessica Barrow for the Ottawa Police Service. Our questions have already been canvassed, so we have nothing further for this witness. Thank you.
Okay, and the Ontario Provincial Police.
I have no questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Slowly, his counsel.
Morning.
Morning.
I'm Tom Curry for former Chief Slowly. I just have a few questions about some facts, if you can help us. The trucks, first of all, I appreciate you don't have a good, accurate count of how many vehicles were in the aggregate of the convoy, or even, I suppose, the Western convoy. Would that be right?
Yes.
Can you tell the Commissioner, though, whether the trucks that came with you in the part of the convoy that you had initiated, were those independent operators?
Yes. A lot of the major companies didn't want the advertisements from their business names on the doors for company drivers. So I would say 95, 98% of the tractor trailer units were independent operators that would be affected by the border mandates.
Right. And that probably relates, doesn't it, to your inability to have all of them follow a particular single set of instructions. Independent operator is more likely to be an independent thinker and
Yes, generally, yes.
And were those independent operators who came from the West operating tractors that had sleeping compartments?
There was a mix. I'm not sure of the numbers. A very small, what we consider called day cabs, where it's just the cab and no sleeper unit. A very small amount. I remember seeing a handful. Yes, there was a few there.
And a day cab operator is not, by definition, that's a person who's not operating a vehicle on a long haul unless they've got accommodation someplace else, which they wouldn't normally have.
Right.
And so for the drivers and operators who were in tractors with sleeper units, did they remain in their sleeper units during the period of the convoy?
I'd say there'd be a mixed bag. What I kind of realized, the community really came together. So the trucks would have to run a lot because it was so frigid. What one guy would do would rent a hotel room and then cycle through drivers to get cleaned up and showered and looked after. The majority of the guys slept in their trucks in the night.
And they'd need fuel to keep running for the reasons that you've given, to keep the unit warm.
Yes, for heat.
And so the fuel, did you recognize it as that? I appreciate what you told my friends, that you weren't 100% sure how long this thing was going to last when you came.
Fuel wasn't something we were worried about at the first. We didn't know. I didn't know what to expect when we got here. I had no clue. And so it was confusing to try and keep everything straight in a day.
And fuel became a challenge for you as a convoy organizer and police and the residents in the community because of the safety risks. Is that fair?
Yes.
And was that one of the things that you tried to work with police to minimize that risk?
I remember having conversations with some of the officers in regards to what we call a slip tank, which is a fixed 500-gallon tank in the back of a pickup truck with a hose and a pump. Was a lot safer and a lot less risk of fuel spilling compared to people walking around with 5-gallon jerry cans. That wasn't the proper way to do things. And I tried to have a conversation multiple times to get more slip tanks in to put fuel in those trucks compared to the safety hazards of the jerry cans.
Right. You hadn't brought slip tanks yourselves?
No, we didn't. No.
So there was, in terms of the organization, the fuel and how you were going to provide fuel for trucks running past, say, the first weekend was not a part of the plan that you had.
It was not.
Fair?
No, not at all.
Okay. And then a couple of things. You told the commissioner that you succeeded in moving the load. I think it was a load safe truck that was on an angle at Rideau and Sussex.
Yeah.
police had been unable to get that operator to cooperate. And even then, when you turned to the rest of the Rideau and Sussex operators, no luck at all.
I tried multiple times with Rideau and Sussex, and good guys, really good guys, and they had a point, and they were protesting, and yeah, we just had a difference. I did what I could, but.
Couple of other things, and finally, if I could, Mr. Barber, you told us, and I don't want to know what the legal advice was, but early on in this effort, is it right that you turned your minds to what lawful protest looked like and what unlawful protest would look like?
We were very fortunate that we had lawyers fly in. I believe it was the first week, and we had guidance there. We had somebody that we could have, would tell us what our rights were, because, you know, being truck drivers, we're not all really good at litigating. So we had lawyers, we had people that could give us advice. There was a ton of advice there, and it was very much appreciated.
Weren't able necessarily, or maybe at all, to put that legal advice into action across the whole spectrum of the convoys, though?
No.
And final thing then, Ed, I think on the 7th of February, you became aware that police were intending to mobilize additional personnel in the number of 1,800. Am I right that signaled to you as a convoy operator that there was going to be a police response coming?
Yes, it did. Yeah, we knew it was inevitable at some point, I guess. We were hoping it wasn't. We were hoping we were able to resolve the issues with the government and we could all go home, but that didn't transpire.
Right. And you knew as to that, the negotiation, that speaking to police you've heard about the police, you probably saw them.
Spoke with a lot of police liaison.
They weren't able to, they were never going to be able to to negotiate with you for the kinds of things that you wanted to speak to government about.
No, they were successful in negotiating between the city, I believe, and us, and that was a step in the right direction. We were hoping that one step forward would maybe result in another step higher, and we could have an audience, but it didn't.
With the federal government?
With some sort of federal government, yes.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the Ottawa residents.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Barber, my name is Paul Champ. I'm a lawyer for the Ottawa Coalition for Residents and Businesses. And
good morning, Mr. Champ.
I have some questions for you.
Sure.
I think you may already be aware of this. I'm from Saskatchewan as well, so we have.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay.
Good.
We're both from God's land.
Whereabouts, may I ask?
Regina.
Ah, good.
But I've been in your area many, many times.
It is God's country.
So, Mr. Barber, I'd just like to start about the reasons why you were coming to Ottawa. It was about mandates generally, or was it just the trucker mandates, the mandate or the border restriction that truckers could no longer enter or pass through if they?
I can only speak for myself, but for me personally, it was the border mandates. That was the last straw per se in the government going too far and wanting. I needed my voice to be heard.
Right. In government going too far, it was everything. It was the restrictions, the restrictions from going into restaurants, from schools were shut down, all of those sorts of things. It just built up, and that was the last straw for you.
There's so many different stories that I've heard throughout this ordeal that contribute to why we went there. When you're hearing stories of people's parents dying in a hospital bed alone because mandates wouldn't allow their kids to be with their adults when they took their last breath. You've seen the mental health issues in this country just plummet. It was sad. I watched that with my own children. My daughter, it was 16 at the time, was unvaxxed in high school, bullied by the rest of her classmates because she wasn't vaccinated. She had to play a clarinet in music class in a separate room.
The trucker mandate in particular, though, the United States had a mandate in place at the same time, correct? So it didn't matter what Ottawa did?
I believe it came in afterwards. I believe the Canadian government announced the mandate first. Okay. Excuse me.
But many mandates that people were upset about were provincial mandates, right? I guess Ottawa was like a symbol of all levels of government for many of those people in the convoy?
I think honestly, when it comes to the provincial mandates, they were a lot to deal with. They didn't affect my business to the way that the federal mandates affected my business. That was the driving, and I struggled with it even though they've been in place since then. It has still been a struggle the entire summer to try and keep up with the lack of drivers and equipment we can get across the border. But we've literally lost a lot of guys.
So, Mr. Barber, I want to ask you some questions about your arrival in Ottawa. Since the Ottawa Police didn't ask you any questions about this, I want to understand. You believed that when you were coming to Ottawa, when you were in the last 100 kilometers, your understanding was that the trucks would be going to staging areas. Is that right?
Yes.
And outside the city?
No. And to this day, I've never been to these parks, but my understanding coming across Canada was two staging areas, Major Hills Park and Confederate Park, were the two places that the OPP, now whether that message got mixed up somewhere along the lines, that is what I was told, and that is what I understood coming across Canada. We had places to stay, staging areas in these two parks. We had porta potties set up, ready to go. They were prepared for us when we got there, and that turned out to be not true.
And when did that change? Like, who informed you that you could just go to downtown Ottawa instead, and when?
Well, OPS led myself and another truck before the convoy was cut off at the War Museum there. It became clear to me then, with the amount of people downtown, with the amount of traffic in downtown, and we slowly kind of worked our way to the Supreme Court is where I couldn't go any further, and that's where I was stopped. That's where my tractor remained until I believe I removed it from the city on the 7th of February.
Okay. And where did you stay during the course of the protest?
I had a hotel room. We were at the Arc Hotel for a little while, and then we moved to the Sheraton, I believe.
Okay. And I've seen a news story about your text messages that you had with some of the organizers, and seen reference of you having texts with Ms. Leach on January 30th, where she said that she'd received a call from the command center. What was the command center for you guys?
I remember seeing that in my disclosure too. So the text message was something to the sort of received a message from the command center. Was the basement at the Swiss Hotel. We had people there that were looking after EMTs. We had people on the ground to make sure people were safe in the crowds. EMT, RCMP, or police response. Right. It was quite the operation. Tamara discussed the fact they wanted to
gridlock the city.
Gridlock the city.
Right. And she said, I don't want to make this decision on my own. Can you come head over here soon? Did you go over to that meeting at the command center?
I don't remember having that conversation with her. And even if it had happened, I went right back out to make sure emergency lanes were open with police. So if there was a meeting, it wasn't to gridlock the city. It would have been to keep the emergency lanes open. That was my primary job the entire time I was here.
But the trucks did gridlock the city, you would agree with me?
In certain spots, they did, yes. Like I tried really hard to make sure.
At least the emergency lanes were open.
Emergency lanes. I can tell you, I almost got into a physical altercation at least twice with the driver that was ignorant about moving when I asked him to.
Now, I just want to ask you a couple questions about. You told us you were protesting about the trucker mandate at the border. Were you opposed to mask mandates as well?
I don't like a mask. It's not something that I really enjoy wearing, but in the province of Saskatchewan, where I'm from, I always wore my mask. I like to look at it as I didn't want to have that business get into trouble if a health officer walked in the door and seen I was being ignorant and didn't wear a mask. So I'll admit, when I was in Ottawa, I didn't wear a mask here. We were here for anti-mandates, but I have always followed the rules wherever they are, in every restaurant. When the COVID vaccine passport came out in Saskatchewan, October 1st, I didn't go to a restaurant.
In Ottawa, though, you'd agree with me that large groups of Convoy protesters were going into stores and restaurants and shops all unmasked. You were aware of that?
I was never part of that.
You weren't part of that, but that was a protest tactic, wasn't it?
Not on my part. I believe that was more Canada Unity and James Bowder. I believe that was something that was discussed in the January 13th I remember watching it and listening to James talk about that.
So it was a tactic that was discussed, but you didn't necessarily support it or take part in it?
I never took part in it, no.
And you were aware that in Ontario, there was a law that stores and shops couldn't allow people in with masks, and they'd be fined if they allowed that? You were
Understood, yes.
Yeah, and did you hear stories about staff who were saying things to people, please put on a mask or leave, and staff being threatened? Did you hear stories about that?
Well, I was sick for a little while with a cold, a really bad cold, and I remember going into Shoppers Drug Mart downtown somewhere near the hotel, and I had to put a mask on because the lady wouldn't serve us and refused to serve us, so I put the mask on and no blood.
I just want to ask you some questions about the money. The money that was raised was meant to cover fuel and food and travel expenses for the truckers, is that right?
Yes.
It also covered hotel bills, is that right?
We never had any access to the money. We had a short stint of access. A lot of times the drivers paid for their own hotel rooms. We had approximately, I believe it was like $20,000. That's all the access we had to the money before, I believe the bank accounts were frozen.
You're talking about the GoFundMe money.
Yeah, the GoFundMe.
Yeah, but you guys raised an enormous amount of money outside of that, right? You were raising thousands of dollars a day in cash and e-transfers, correct?
Yeah, the e-transfers would have went into Ms. Litch's personal bank account.
And cash?
I don't know what happened with the cash. The cash was, there was always people donating cash. It was all around, I guess.
There's an interview summary in this matter, I presume you're aware of Mr. Eros. You know Chad Eros?
Yes.
And Chad says that there was approximately $20,000 being raised in cash per day. Does that sound roughly accurate to you?
He was the Freedom Corp paid accountant. I had no knowledge of that. I wasn't involved with any of that.
He also speaks about how that occasionally to get rid of all this cash on hand, they were putting it in envelopes, putting numbers on it, and were giving it out to truckers. You were aware of that?
Yes, I took part in that spot,
You
yes.
took part in that. So you were aware there was large amounts of cash.
I didn't get to count the cash. I was given envelopes, and I would go then see what drivers were in need of some cash and deposit or give them the cash.
Right. So you were handing out, it's my understanding those envelopes was between $500 and $2,000 per envelope?
$500. There was another group that came in towards the end that I believe Miss Belton's group were handing out $2,000 apparently, but it didn't go as far.
And the average trucker earns about $45,000 to $50,000 a year. Is that right, Mr. Barber?
I would say probably more. I'm not sure, 70. It's kind of hard to live off $50,000 a year in this country now.
For sure, for sure. Now, the big amount of money that was raised that you could never access with GoFundMe nor Give, Send, Go, there was a lot of people wanting access to that money. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And you guys had to deal with people opportunistically wanting to try to find ways to access that money from you?
I believe that'd be a better question for Miss Litch. I really never, sorry?
That's fair, that's fair, okay. Just getting back to the hotel bills, though, your hotel bill was paid for by someone else, correct?
Yes.
And who was that, Mr. Guerra, that was paying for your hotel?
No, there was a businessman that helped us out along the way, Mr. Burgo, Joseph Burgo. I believe he was fitting the bills for some of our hotel rooms and then mentoring us and helping us out with.
What about Mr. King, Pat King? His hotel bill was paid as well by your group, is that right?
I believe he was. I don't know where Pat stayed. I was under the understanding he was outside the city somewhere in a Airbnb or whatever they call it.
Didn't Mr. King approach you at times asking if the war room or the command center could provide a large amount of money to pay off hotel bills of other supporters?
I don't recall him talking to me personally about that.
But him asking you to put him in touch with someone who had access to the money?
There's a lot of things going on a regular basis, but I don't recall.
Just want to ask you now about the honking. Now, as a truck driver, can you tell us what are air horns and tray horns for?
So an air horn is a factory set of horns on a commercial truck, which is usually mounted on the roof of the cab, operated by, in my personal truck, it's a chain in the center of the dash in the top, and you pull it, it operates the two horns that are on the roof. A train horn is an aftermarket. It is literally 3 large train horns with a valve Usually guys mount them. I don't own a train horn. I've never owned one. It's mounted on the floor and it's got a valve where you put more air to it to make a louder noise, I guess. They're obnoxious.
And the purpose is because the trucks are so large to warn people from very, very, very far away that a truck is coming, correct?
No, the purpose, in my opinion, personal opinion on a train horn is just...
Well, air horns or train horns, same.
Yeah, no, it's used for two primary reasons. One's for excitement. I always like to go back to the kids sitting on the side of the road, or when you have a vehicle pass you with kids in the back seat and they're doing the arm pump. That's the excitement part of an air horn. Then the other part of the air horn is the danger.
Right. And you're trained for your commercial license that air horns, even in themselves, can be dangerously loud, correct?
Yes, yeah.
But in this case, horns became a bit of a symbol for the truckers coming to Ottawa, is that right?
I guess so, yes.
And a symbol for the protest.
My truck was parked in front of the Supreme Court from February 29th when we arrived until I removed it from downtown on February 7th. So I don't believe I personally pulled an air horn after the...
That wasn't my question. My question was that the horns became a bit of a symbol for the protest.
Yeah, they were everywhere, yes.
And once the truckers parked, you didn't, I get that, but many of the trucks were honking all day and night, correct?
For the first little while, yes. And those that wouldn't listen, we tried to reason with and get them... I tried to reason with to try and get them under control.
And they were honking on a schedule of some type, correct? Like it would be like 10 minutes straight for every 30 minutes or something like that?
I don't recall that. There was something to do with that. There was a couple guys in front of Parliament that were obnoxiously blowing their horn, we'll say.
Well, the block captains were coordinating with each other about how and when to blow the horns, were they not?
That was never part of my dealings. I involved myself in a couple of the block captain meetings, but for the most part, I don't remember hearing anything about that. I remember there being a curfew, what was it, 7 to 7 or something like that somebody negotiated in the first week. My memory fails me on exactly what it was.
And you've told us, you testified that you put out several videos asking the truckers to stop honking and respect their residents. Is that right?
Yes.
But isn't it true, Mr. Barber, that your videos were just telling them not to blow the horns in the middle of the night?
I don't recall that. I remember, no, the videos when I would yell, there's multiple videos out there of me yelling stop, and then there was daylight hours, so I was sleeping at night. And to be honest with you, where I was in the hotel room, I don't remember the train or the horns actually waking me or having a hard time sleeping.
There's a HR, I'm not going to ask to put it up because we don't have time. HRF 183 is a video of February 1st on TikTok where you tell guys to stop honking and stop laying on the horns at 3 a.m. And the guys have stopped, which is nice. So you were asking guys not to lay on horns in the middle of the night?
I'd have to see the video again to see that. I don't recall that video. I'm not saying it's not there, but...
or later that day?
It might have been in the evening, I would say. I remember, yeah. I remember doing a video. I've seen it in my evidence here last night where I showed the street in front of my hotel room with the trucks, and it was in the evening, and it was perfectly quiet.
You did put out a TikTok video on February 9th, though, did you not? Saying that if the police tried to come to a truck, they should, notwithstanding the injunction, they should pull on their horns, correct?
So in regards to that video there, in consultation with legal teams, we were instructed that the bunk of your truck was considered a residence, and the police needed to have a warrant to breach the residence of your truck. And we were also instructed by legal counsel that in a case of something like that, what they were telling me, I've never been involved with something like this before, so I have no idea what happens when police kettle, but on my understanding was if the police come and there are mass arrests happening, we were allowed to try and warn the other drivers. So yes, there was a video. It's in evidence, I believe.
Yeah, that's HRF 000217 for the record. And Mr. Barber, Mr. Wilson has put in an interview summary, and we're going to hear from him tomorrow, where he says that you were asking truckers to implement a quiet hours and to only honk between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Is that correct?
Apparently there was some sort of a deal in the first week or so. We were allowed to honk during the days, apparently. So yeah, trying to play by the rules. If I
A deal with whom?
I think with the city. I was never involved with the inner workings of the deals with the city, other than when we did the truck move, or the court injunction, or something to that effect. There was a deal out there, and I don't remember exactly.
Well, I think we heard a little bit of evidence that Mr. Wilson and Ms. Chipiak were trying to negotiate with the city, saying if the truckers agreed to not oppose the renewal of the injunction and to only keep honking between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. So they're trying to get a deal like that. Is that
Could be
right?
possible. They worked behind the scenes relentless. They were honestly godsends. They were right there with us for help.
Right. Because the truck horns were all day. Even all day was quite.
They were annoying. I remember a Sunday service in front of the stage, and we were trying to listen to the pastor do a sermon, and he couldn't. It was kind of like, quit. But that was in front of Wellington, and that was, I believe, in the first week. So,
just the last couple of questions, Mr. Barber. Have you ever met or communicated with Tyler Russell?
I don't know that name.
Or Derek Harrison?
I don't know that name either.
Have you ever met or communicated with Alex Vriend?
No.
And have you ever, you've already been asked about Mr. McKenzie. Okay.
If I had, like I said, my phone was extremely busy. There's a ton of numbers on that phone that if there would be no contact name with it, there might have been somebody contact me, but not to my knowledge, I should say, right?
I understand. All right, thank you, Mr. Barber. Those are all the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Champ.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Okay, next call on the CCLA.
Good afternoon, Mr. Barber. I'm going to be asking you questions via Zoom. My name is Eva Krajewska, and I'm counsel to the Canadian Civil Liberties Association.
Pleased to meet you.
My questions are going to focus on the impact of the orders freezing the bank accounts. So I understand from your earlier evidence that your bank accounts were frozen during the course of or after the protest. Is that fair?
Yes, they were.
And can you just please specify for me, was it your personal account that was frozen?
So we've got three major accounts that were frozen. One was the corporate account. The other one was a joint bank account with my lovely wife. And the third was Toronto Dominion personal bank account. The personal bank account with Toronto Dominion was closed for roughly 3.5 months. I had no access to funds. The other two bank accounts were, they were closed for the weekend. A couple payments went back. I had one NSF charge, I believe, and the fuel cards got shut off for my drivers, so they weren't very happy.
Okay, and so let me just break that down. The fuel cards for your drivers, are those business credit cards?
In my line of business with the trucking company, we run card lock cards with different fuel distributors, and I have agreements with those fuel companies to withdraw payments automatically out of my accounts every Sunday. So I'm up on current on my fuel bills.
And are those linked to your corporate account then?
Yes, they are.
And so when your corporate account was frozen, then the fuel cards were also inoperative?
Yes.
Okay, and you said that they were frozen on the Sunday. So is that, would that be the Sunday, the 20th of February?
20th. They would have been frozen on the 17th, I believe.
Okay.
My bank manager at CIBC explained to me that they were reopened on Monday. She wouldn't give me details. She'd explained to me that she'd got an email from RCMP saying it was an illegal freeze or something, and that they were reopened right away. But Toronto Dominion was a different story. Toronto Dominion was closed without any excuse. I tried desperately to get a hold of somebody from Toronto Dominion to explain to me why my accounts were frozen, and I yet to receive an explanation.
And so with respect to when your accounts were frozen, were they frozen before or after you were arrested?
I believe they were frozen on the day of. I wasn't really using a debit card. All the stores were closed downtown, so I believe the 17th is when they were frozen.
Right. And you were informed that they were frozen with respect to your corporate account, your CIBC corporate account. It was someone at CIBC who informed you that they were frozen?
I believe so. I don't think I knew that the corporate account was frozen until I didn't have a cell phone, so I couldn't check balances or anything until I got back home, I believe.
So it was only after the fact when you came home that you learned that it had been frozen by a letter from CIBC or by a telephone call?
That I can't recall. I don't remember if I got much correspondence. I'm personal friends with my banker at CIBC, so she may have sent me a text message. I didn't have a phone, so I can't recall.
And in your TD bank account, how did you learn, the personal one, how did you learn that that was frozen?
The debit card wouldn't work.
And you said that you tried to obtain information from TD as to why it was frozen and why it took so long to reopen?
Yes.
And you did not get, did you get a satisfactory answer?
No, I didn't. I was given a phone number and a first name, and when I called that number, I was just a short answer. I believe I spoke with him. He called me back once. I kind of made it a point to call him every week to question him on why. And I never did get an answer back.
And was the first name and phone number that you received, it was someone from the TD Bank?
It was, yeah, somebody in Ontario, I believe. His name was
And did you
Jay.
ever receive any correspondence from the RCMP or the OPS with respect to the freezing of your bank accounts?
I did not, no.
Okay. And can you speak to me first about the impact of the freezing of your corporate bank account? What impact did it have on your business? You mentioned the cancellation of the fuel cards. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, a cancellation of my fuel cards. So I had to remake the payment. The fuel cards were shut off because of the lack of payment. There was an NSF charge. One that happened down the road a little ways. I applied for a loan and was going to put a significant amount of cash down, like money down on the loan for a deposit, and I was rejected from my financing company because of the account being frozen. Apparently, I don't know. They wouldn't really explain. They just said I was declined the loan, and I have a perfect credit rating. I have never been in trouble with credit. It's been years since I've been in trouble with a credit rating. 20-some plus years, I would say. So I stand good with the banks. That was a little tough to.
Sorry, sir. With respect to the fuel cards, for how long were your drivers not able to use the fuel cards to supply the vehicles?
I would imagine it was a matter of a day or two. I was into the bank right away. I was home, so I was able to get into the bank and make the payment right away. And fuel companies are good, but they get pretty nervous when a payment gets returned.
I'm sure everybody does. And sir, with respect to your personal bank account, you said that, how did that impact? Can you provide a little bit more elaboration on how it impacted you? You said that you had to use cash. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that, or how it impacted you to have your personal bank account frozen?
It changes everything you do. You don't realize how much you use the debit card in your pocket, I guess. I went back to, as any Canadian, apparently you keep a small stash of cash for emergencies, and that got used. I had to go back to cash for the time being.
Thank you, sir. Those are all my questions.
Appreciate it.
Okay, next, JCCF and Democracy Fund.
Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Barber.
Afternoon.
My name is Antoine Dailly. I'm counsel to Citizens for Freedom, representing the peaceful protesters in Windsor.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Barber, you indicated that you led a convoy of trucks from out west to Ottawa and that you were a point of contact with local police forces along the way. Have you ever had any contact with the Windsor Police Service?
I don't believe so, no.
And you indicated that while you were traveling across the country, that one of your primary responsibilities was dealing with logistics, listening to the radio chatter. Do you ever recall receiving or responding to any requests for support from the demonstrators in Windsor, whether it's, requests for trucks or other logistical support?
I don't believe so, no. It was a busy phone. Yeah, I may have missed something, but I don't remember or recall ever receiving any contact.
Perfect. And if you did receive this type of request, is this something that you would have brought up with your internal leadership team?
No, we were busy here enough. We weren't worried about Windsor, Coots, or anywhere else.
Perfect. And so the convoy that you were leading across the country to Ottawa, that did not pass through or anywhere near Windsor, Ontario. Is that correct?
It did not, no.
And were any of the road captains or other trucks that were part of your convoy, were any of them, to your knowledge, dispatched to Windsor?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Now, earlier this morning, you were showing a TikTok video where you're talking about let's hit them, presuming the federal government, where it hurts. And I'd like to paint some clarity from you on that statement. So in this case, when you say let us hit them, us in this case, you're referring to the convoy and its supporters. Is that correct?
Yes, against the mandates.
And in terms of where it hurts, was one of those places you were referencing the Ambassador Bridge, or were you focused exclusively on attending a protest in Ottawa?
Exclusively attending the protest in Ottawa.
Perfect. And so, to the best of your knowledge, did any of the core organizers of the Freedom Convoy attempt to establish any kind of slow roll or any type of blockade in Windsor for the purposes of impeding border traffic?
No, not to my knowledge.
So is it then fair to say that from your perspective, blocking ports of entry or impeding traffic at any port of entry, whether that's in Windsor or in Sarnia, was not an objective of the convoy organizers?
Yeah, we had nothing to do with Windsor. That was, as far as I know, they had more issues at those border crossings from what I watched on social media lives. It wasn't the same thing as what we were doing here.
Okay. And when were you first made aware that the demonstration at the Ambassador Bridge had been cleared by police?
I don't recall when. I don't know the story there. I didn't pay enough. Like I said, it was so busy here, I didn't have time to pay attention to anywhere else.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. And for the convoy organizers?
Mr. Barber.
Mr. Miller.
How are you?
Very well.
For the record, Brendan Miller, appearing as counsel for the Freedom Corp, which is the entity that represents the protesters, including yourself, that were in Ottawa in January and February of 2022. Good morning. How are you feeling?
Feeling good. Thank you very much.
Great. So first question, if at any time during the protest and the demonstration, if the City of Ottawa or the Ottawa Police Service provided you, the truckers and the protesters, an order from a court saying that you had to leave or move your trucks out of downtown Ottawa, what would you have done?
A court order? I would assume we would have left, yes.
Yeah. And I understand we've had discussions and you've had discussions with legal counsel. You understand what invoking the Riot Act now means, do you not?
Approximately, yes.
Yeah. And so if a mayor, sheriff, or justice invoked the Riot Act and ordered that you and the protesters and the trucks left downtown Ottawa, what would you have done?
Instructed people to leave?
And it's fair to say, as Chief Slawley testified, at no time did any police officer or city official come and tell the protesters that they were illegally parked and illegally, unlawfully protesting and had to leave. Is that fair?
Not to my knowledge. At that point, my truck was out of the city. I had no equipment here.
Okay. So my friend asked you about the Memorandum of Understanding drafted by a Mr. James Bowder and his Canada Unity organization. I have a few questions about that. So these Canada Unity folks, to your knowledge, how many of them were in Ottawa?
Hard to say. I honestly don't know. James Bowder was the only one at the time that I knew. There was different people, I think, representing him.
Okay. So how many Canada Unity folks did you interact with that you knew were representing him?
I believe none.
Okay.
I believe none.
And did you observe Mr. Bowder or anyone else that may have been with Canada Unity to be violent and commit any violent acts?
No, sir.
Okay. And did you hear of any of these Canada Unity members act in a violent way or try to incite violence?
No.
Did you hear any of these Canada Unity members state they wanted to overthrow the government of Canada by violent means?
I never heard anything.
And I take it that you asked your lawyers in Ottawa at the time, being Keith Wilson and Eva Chipiuk, about this memorandum of understanding from Canada Unity. Is that right?
I don't recall having a conversation with them. I believe it might have been a conversation in the group of people together that it had no bearing and it wasn't to be looked at. It was essentially nothing.
Do you remember the lawyers describing it as legal nonsense?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. And I also understand, of course, you've had some interactions with Mr. Pat King, and as well as some of his followers. How many followers did Mr. King have?
I think Pat had a substantial following on Facebook, I believe.
What do I mean physically in Ottawa?
Oh, there was a few. Absolutely, there was a few.
How would you use a bit of a weasel word? Do you mind if you can clarify? What number would you estimate?
There is so many people here. So many people with every different background. I don't even know if I could guess, Mr. Miller.
Okay. And did you observe Pat King or any of his followers carry out any acts of violence?
I did not know.
And did you hear Pat King or any of his followers incite protesters in Ottawa to commit acts of violence?
No.
Did Pat King or any of his followers ever state to you that they're going to physically and violently overthrow the government of Canada?
Never, no.
And what about this Jeremy McKenzie fella? Did you ever hear of him seeking that protesters act violently or incite people to commit violent acts?
No.
Did Jeremy McKenzie or any of his followers or veterans that you know of say that they were going to physically and violently overthrow the government of Canada?
None.
All right. And lastly, of course, Ms. Tamara Leach. How's your relationship with Ms. Leach?
Definitely strained over the last however many months it's been, with a court order against us contacting each other. So yeah, I met her. I spent approximately a month with her, got to know her quite well. She's a genuine, a good person. And then I only get to see her now through legal counsel. So someday maybe we'll fix that.
Now I take it, how tall is Ms. Leach?
Pretty close to midget height. Like,
Yeah, she's about a midget. And
I'm not even going to look at her right now.
But I take it she's still a very scary lady, is she not?
It's the short ones you really have to worry about.
Well, yeah, like Napoleon.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So she's the Napoleon of truckers, is that fair? Yes. All right. Now, did the Napoleon of truckers, Ms. Leach, did she ever say to you that she intended to carry out an act of violence while she was in Ottawa?
I don't think she'd harm a butterfly. No, she would never say that.
Right. And I take it she also, you never saw her assault anyone or commit any violent acts?
Absolutely not.
And I take it she never said to you that she was here in Ottawa to violently take over the government of Canada?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Now, my friends asked you some questions about what I would refer to as collusion with some of the other protests that were outside of Ottawa, right? So you had the big ones, you had Coutts, Windsor, as well as the ones in Manitoba and another one in Surrey. To your knowledge, did any of the truckers or protesters at all in all of Ottawa, to your knowledge, have any coordination in whatsoever in setting up these other protests outside of Ottawa?
No, they were all, as far as I understand, they were all organic movements.
Right. And you heard the evidence from Chief Slully as well as Commissioner Carrerick. They speculated that it was possible that the one protest in Windsor was coordinated with Ottawa just based on the geographical distance between the two and the splitting of resources. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't agree with that assumption. I can't see, being how organic the movement was, honestly, I'd say we weren't smart enough to come up with that idea.
Okay. Well, that's a fine admission. Now, if Mr. Register, if you wouldn't mind putting up document HRF 00000052, it's the one that Canada for the Attorney General put to my client earlier. Now, did you have a chance to review this document before the questions that were asked of you of the Attorney General today?
I don't believe I did.
Can we just give you a quick moment to do that? And so if, Mr. Register, if you could scroll down there. So there, and just for summary for the folks at home, you have a heading with Ottawa weather, inspirational thoughts for the day, a video of Klaus Schwab describing Trudeau's loyalty to the World Economic Forum, a CTV poll on the Emergencies Act, which states that 81% of people disapprove of it, financial supporters, scrolling down, Quebec drops mandates, Feds scrap pre-arrival PCR tests, British Columbia drops capacity limits, bank run, crypto bank, the picture of Madam Deputy Prime Minister, another Albertan, and Daily Humor.
Yes.
Do you see anything invoking violence in that document?
I don't know.
Do you know of any of the documents that are like that, the daily briefings that asked for violence or sought violence?
I can't speak. I don't think I read any of them, but I would say no. There was never any talk of it.
Okay. Now I'd like to bring up, if I may, Mr. Registrar, the other document that Canada put up, which is HRF 00000083. Okay. And you were, it was put to you, the video of Mr. King, Pat King was put to you with respect to the bullets comments. And this was the media release, I take it, that was released in response to that?
The dates seem pretty far apart for that. I believe the bullets comment was earlier, so I'm assuming this was the day I was arrested, so I haven't read this one.
Okay. Do you want to have a read?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't review it at the time, but I've seen it now since.
And I take it, do you agree with those statements therein?
I do, yes.
Okay, thank you. And I also understand that with respect to the daily security briefings, the one that we looked at earlier, you weren't involved in drafting any of these?
I was not, no.
And I take it you didn't review any of them before they were sent out?
No, sir.
All right. Now, with respect to the mandates, and I just want to touch on that briefly, can you tell the commission about how the mandates impacted your children, other than what you already have with respect to your daughter's clarinet story?
Well, I've got a 19-year-old son, Jonathan. He was 18 at the time. He's refused to get the vaccine. He's been around people with COVID multiple times, and he's yet to catch it for some reason. So he's going off his natural immunity. He's a very strong-willed guy. I don't know where he gets that from. He refuses to get it, and I stand behind him on that.
Okay. And what else? Anything else other than what you've already said?
My parents, my father received his second dose of his, and it could be together or not, his gallbladder quit working on him. And I watched my father deteriorate quite badly. He's fine now, but still, you lose that body mass. You don't seem to get it back at 70 years old. So.
Okay. Now, I want to move on from that and talk about some of the moving of the trucks. I understand at some point in the protest in Ottawa, you moved your trucks from Wellington, or your truck, out of the city to a remote camp.
Yes.
When was that?
February 7th, to my best recollection.
Okay. And is it true that when you were trying to leave downtown Ottawa that the police roadblocks made it very hard for you to leave?
It was very tricky, yes. There was roadblocks everywhere.
So can you describe for the commission your initial moving your truck and trying to get out of downtown Ottawa, and just sort of walk us through in a timeline?
It was February 7th, I believe. I was parked in front of the Supreme Court, so, and I still didn't really know my way around Ottawa that well at that time. So I remember going down whatever street would have been near there, Lyon or somewhere in there. It was tough. It was hard to navigate your way back out of there and then make sure you were on the right street that was heading the right direction. So eventually I made my way out of the city. It was tough.
And how did you get past the barricades and the blockades?
You had to get a police approval to move every single barricade. There was a police car. There was, when we first arrived in Ottawa, the city officials used payloaders, graders, and trucks to blockade the streets for safety concerns or whatever it was they did. And then when the snowfall came, the first snowfall came, I remember they removed all that and they replaced them with concrete barriers. And then a police car would sit at each barrier in the center and would be able to move to allow traffic to go through. So.
And to your knowledge, was there any incidents of any of the truckers and protesters trying to leave but could not?
No. If somebody needed to leave, we would facilitate that no matter what.
And what I mean is with respect to moving the police barricades.
Oh, no, it was a job to get somebody out of the city, but nobody ever had troubles. It wasn't forced to stay, if you're meaning that.
Sounds good. And with respect to you walking the streets during the protest, what did you see?
Life-changing. Yeah, it was amazing. There was so much grown men crying on your shoulder, women crying on your shoulder, grandmas, grandpas, you name it, kids. It was really, and it was an experience, unforgettable.
Is there anything notable that you remember of who you spoke to?
Who I didn't speak to? It was everybody. You couldn't. I remember Mr. Marazzo when I went for a walk and Mr. Wilson, and it was like Mr. Wilson explained it as like walking down the street with Mick Jagger. He said, because no matter where you went, there was somebody wanting to stop and talk with you. It was a lot of love.
And can you tell us about the efforts to move the trucks on Monday, February 14th?
Frustrating. We had all those trucks ready to go, 7 o'clock in the morning. We'd spoke with them the night before on the Sunday. We had the streets lined up. We had everybody all placed. We had organized trucks to come. I don't remember the block. It was right in front of Parliament on pretty much on West Block. We were able to, we get them all organized, all warmed up, and then we couldn't get anybody to move. The police wouldn't move, the city officials. You could tell by my text messages with Kim that it was frustrating. We were ready to go, and we were deprived time to get things going.
So at that point in time, the police blockaded you in from leaving?
Yeah.
Even though you were trying to leave?
We were trying to, I don't know if the trucks leaving had as much trouble as the trucks trying to get up onto Wellington. That was what my focus was. My focus was only getting the trucks on the Wellington. Other guys looked after the ones that wanted to leave the city.
So from where the trucks were parked, did the police move the barricades to allow you out?
I'm assuming so. I didn't take part in the actual leaving. Like I said, my focus was the trucks on the Wellington.
Okay, so you were up at Wellington at that time and you weren't down where the trucks were trying to get out of?
Yes.
Okay. And I understand during that time that you were able to get approximately 100 trucks and protest vehicles to leave downtown residential areas, which included 40 semi-trucks, of which 23 went up to Wellington. Is that fair?
Yes.
And you were aware that the vehicles that left downtown and did not go up to Wellington, they were either went home or they went out to a base camp in Arnprior or Enbrun. Is that fair?
Yes.
And so you had cleared out 2 blocks on Albert Street and from some other streets. Is that about right?
In the time we were allotted, we cleared out the 2 blocks. We had plans to clear out more.
You just hold on a minute, yes?
It's David Mijakowski for the record. I did not object initially, but I do understand that the rules of the commission do not allow counsel for the parties to cross-examine, and my friend has been cross-examining on several occasions. This is a matter of some contention, so I would just ask that his questions be phrased in a non-leading fashion.
So that's not a problem. So can you tell me about then how many trucks do you believe were moved in total?
I was told 100 vehicles, approximately 40 trucks, 23 of which we moved up onto Wellington.
Okay. And while you were involved in the protest and in Ottawa, did you attend any businesses in downtown Ottawa?
Oh, many. Frequented the Tim Hortons for meals. We frequented any restaurants that were open. Any business that I was in, the Iconic Cafe was another one, shawarma, any business that we were in flourished. They did really well. Then they said a lot of the businesses said they hadn't profited so much in the last 2 years as they did in that 3 weeks.
And during that, just adding to it, what was your relationship like with those business establishments, their staff and owners during the protest? You want to tell me a little bit about it?
I remember the Tim Hortons on one of the corners there. Truckers were mopping the floor because the staff was overrun, and guys had the mop pail out and they were cleaning the floors. Of course, it's winter time, sloshy and disgusting floors. I was pretty proud to see that.
And did any of the business owners approach you before the end of the protest about anything they wanted to say to you?
Not that I recall, no.
And I take it you've seen throughout this proceeding witnesses discuss views on assaultive or threatening behavior and what that means. You've seen that?
Apparently, yes.
Now, I understand that you heard a statement from the Prime Minister where he called unvaccinated Canadians racist, misogynist, and asked, should we tolerate these people? Do you remember hearing that?
I remember hearing that, yeah.
What's your perception of that? Would you say, in your opinion, is that assaultive or threatening?
Just, let's be careful again. You've got the...
Understood. What was your perception of that statement?
Very divisive for a leader of a country to be pitting one person in the country against the other person. I would say I felt, not very leadership worthy.
And have you experienced assaultive and threatening words and behavior from other politicians or others?
I've seen some in the news reports, I guess. Yeah, there's a few. Not that I can recall, not that I can recall the names of the ministers, but there's been a few.
Okay. Well, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, any re-examination?
Yes, Commissioner. A few points of clarification based on some of the answers you provided, Mr. Barber. In response to questions from Counsel for former Chief Slowly, you indicated that in your efforts to speak to the protesters at Rideau Sussex, you said, I think, you spoke to them and you said they had a point. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you remember what their point was?
I don't remember what their point was. No. And there was a barrier, a language barrier there because they were French Canadians. So my French is, I don't speak French, so I had a hard time understanding them.
And when Mr. Champ was asking you questions, I thought I heard you mention that Miss Belton's group was one of the groups that was handing out cash. Did I hear that correctly?
There was sort of a riff, sort of a split between the two groups. Miss Belton's, when I heard the $500 versus the $2,000, that was Miss Bridget's, was trying to, the group of people that were donating or passing out $2,000 instead of the $500.
Did Miss Belton's group have a label?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. And how many people were in Miss Belton's group?
I can't say, 10, 15.
And then again, in response to questions from Mr. Champ, you mentioned a Mr. Bourgault?
Yes.
Okay, do you know Mr. Bourgault's first name?
Joseph.
Okay, and can you just tell the commission a bit more about what Mr. Bourgault was doing in your interactions with him?
Joseph Bourgault is a good friend of mine. He is a big business owner in the province of Saskatchewan. Well-respected man, and he offered his services to mentor. He spoke to me on a regular basis, just on protocol and advice, and a really good guy.
And was he providing some financial support to the protesters?
Well, I think at first our bank accounts were all, like we had no money coming in, Give, Send, Go or GoFundMe wouldn't release any funds to us, so we were financially strapped for the amount of hotels, so hopefully someday we can pay that back.
And sorry, I don't think I got the answer there. Did Mr. Bourgault provide financial assistance?
He did, yes.
Okay. And how did he provide financial assistance?
With hotel rooms.
Okay. Ms. Krajewska from the CCLA was asking you about bank accounts that were being frozen, and as I understood the TD account you spoke about, you said it had been frozen for 3.5 months?
Yes, sir.
Do you know why it was frozen for that long?
To this day, I still don't know. I would imagine it had something to do, Ms. Litch added my name to her Toronto Dominion Bank where the funds, the GoFundMe funds went into for the GoFundMe, the 1 million, and then the e-transfer. For transparency, she added myself to her bank account. So everything was out in the open. There was 2 sets of eyes looking at it. The biggest worry for her was that somebody would accuse her of misusing funds, which wasn't the case.
So the TD bank account you're referring to, that was an account that originally was opened by Ms. Leach?
I had a personal Toronto Dominion, so all she did was merge the 2 savings accounts, so I could physically see her savings account on my card. That's the only thing that I assume had to do with why my bank account was frozen for 3.5 months.
So you had a pre-existing TD account,
Yes,
and then Ms. Leach added you to the account that she had created for the purposes of getting the GoFundMe funds?
Yeah, for the purposes of transparency, so that there was more eyes on that account than just hers.
And then my final area to examine is we've heard a little bit more about Confederation Park and Major Hills Park. Did you ever see Confederation Park or Major Hills Park?
I'm hoping I can this week. I've never seen it. I've only heard about it, so that'll be on my list to do after this inquiry.
Do you know what use is made of that park
I have
normally?
no idea.
Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, I just have a couple of questions. They're probably just general in the sense of what would be the cost of the fuel to have driven here from Saskatchewan?
So with today's fuel prices, roughly about $3,000 probably in fuel to come out here from Saskatchewan. It was quite the feat.
Okay, and just one thing I wanted to follow up on was you were, one of your main functions, or certainly what you were doing, was to try and keep the emergency lanes open.
Yes, sir.
And you said there were some that you just couldn't keep open, and I think you mentioned Rideau, is that?
Rideau was the hard one. There was, Rideau was the one that we tried multiple times. The other one was somewhere on Kent, I believe. We tried really hard to keep Kent open. I remember the first time we visited Kent, we worked all day. We got that lane wide open, and we were so proud of ourselves. We came back the next morning, and it was completely plugged again. We kept working on them, but.
Okay. So those are 2 areas where the lanes just couldn't be kept open?
Yes, sir.
Were there other areas that you found either you couldn't keep open or were regularly problematic?
To my recollection, everything was well looked after other than those 2 areas. Those were the only two areas of concern that I felt that I had troubles with personally, and the group of people that I was with.
Okay. And would that be because they were not, among other things, they weren't part of your group? Is that, or were they part of your group, some of them?
Yeah, the Rideau Sussex was not part of our original group. They were there a day or so before we arrived. Kent may have been. I didn't recognize all the trucks. There was some in Kent that was part of the original West group. I can confirm that, yes.
Okay, and those are my questions. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
We will adjourn for the lunch break. We'll take an hour for lunch and come back with another witness.